Chapter 159. After entering the gate of the base, the horse stopped. It kept snorting as though it did not like the smell of the place. When the drug lords heard the commotion, they ran out with guns in hand. Thus, they did not wear any protective equipment. The purpose of bulletproof vests and helmets was not to stop bullets. With the exception of the super heavy helmets used for explosive disposal, there was no other helmet in the world that could stop a rifle bullet. Even if he was lucky enough to block the bullet, his ribs would be broken if the bullet hit him, and his neck would be broken if the bullet hit him. This was equivalent to the full power attack of a martial arts expert. Thus, the real purpose of the protective equipment was to stop the debris and rubble produced by the explosion on the battlefield. Because the 200 to 300 people were standing too close to each other, the 3 rockets exploded right in the middle of the hornet's nest. Some of the people who were standing further away were also injured by the rubble from the rocket launcher. As for those who were blessed by God and did not suffer any injuries, they were also stunned by the powerful explosion. They fell to the ground and were unable to get up. The rocket launcher was much more powerful than the bullets. Broken limbs littered the ground and blood continuously flowed into the crater created by the rocket launcher. In just a short while, a shallow pool of blood had already formed. Because the scene was too bloody, Chunshi immediately displayed his good habit. That was to clean up the battlefield. Regardless of whether they were dead or not, he would go up and burn them all to ashes. Massacre? Bloody? Cruel? No, this was purification. In terms of brutality, if terrorists were ranked first, then drug lords would definitely be ranked second. Thus forgiving them was God's job. Chunshi was only responsible for sending them to see God. 200 to 300 people were instantly engulfed by the fire. Qin Shueqing glanced at the scene and walked out from the outpost. Then, she stood beside Chunshi with a complicated expression. Chunshi picked up a gun from the ground. Caliber. The first small-caliber rifle to be officially listed in the world. It was used on a large scale during the Vietnam War. Now, it had been completely retired and replaced by the M16A2. The old version had become a civilian rifle in North America and Europe. He had played Counter-Strike before, but he had never played with a real gun. So after getting the gun, he studied it carefully. In the end, he didn't forget to take out the magazine and take a look. Then he put it back. Fortunately, the magazine was full. Let's go and see where the hostages are being held. Leaving the horse at the gate, Chunshi swaggered into the base with Qin Shueqing. Taking the layout of a regular military base as an example, the outer perimeter was a sentry post, surveillance tower, machine gun tower, concrete walls, and barbed wire. Inside the base was an arsenal, an armory, a fuel depot, and barracks, including dormitories, dining halls, and toilets. The drug lords were not so particular. The anti-aircraft guns were placed at the entrance of the base, and the surface-to-air missile launchers were placed in the middle of the base. What was even more bizarre was that there was actually a villa not far behind the missile launcher. The villa was 2 stories high and there was a small garden in front of it. It was obvious that this was the base of the drug lords. The 2 of them surrounded the base. Chunshi held his gun and constantly shot at the fish that tried to escape the net. Whoever dared to show their head, he raised his gun and shot. 30 bullets were quickly used up. When there were no more bullets, he threw down the rifle and shattered the ground with his foot. With a wave of his hand, a series of gravel accurately hit the enemy's forehead. In the beginning, some small shrimps tried to resist by shooting, but as the 2 of them gradually went deeper, the sound of gunfire gradually subsided. The 2 of them walked straight to the villa. At this time, Chunshi discovered a problem. In the beginning, 200 to 300 people died. In addition to the small shrimps that came out one after another, there were at most 400 people. It was impossible for such a large military base to only have so few people. No matter how he thought about it, something felt wrong. Then where were the people? Chunshi pondered as he pushed open the door of the villa with Qin Shueqing. This was a magnificent villa. If the floors were a little higher, it could almost be called a castle. The drug lords had no taste and were purely nouveau riche. Therefore, the decoration in the villa was very luxurious. There were all kinds of gorgeous and luxurious furnishings that could be considered dazzling. Among them, the most eye-catching was the bearskin carpet that could be seen as soon as they walked in. The villa was empty, There was no one in sight. The two of them looked at each other. When Chen-Shi was about to say something, a child suddenly appeared on the stairs on the second floor. It was a Nanyang child who looked to be only 12 or 13 years old. His face was full of fear and timidity. In sharp contrast, the AK-74 in his arms was the stark contrast. As the most widely used automatic rifle in the world, the AK-47 was known as the world's king of guns. A total of 100 million units were produced. At least 53 countries purchased and fully equipped it. 5 countries even painted it on their national flags. This was the synonym for slaughter. So far, at least 20 million people had died under the muzzle of the AK-47. It was far more than the number of casualties caused by the 2 atomic bombs in Japan. The black barrel trembled slightly. The child seemed to be very afraid. Seeing this, Qin Shihuiqing could not help but be stunned. But in the moment when she was distracted, the child suddenly opened fire. Da-da-da. The muzzle of the gun spat out tongues of fire. There was no fear on the child's face. There was only excitement and fanaticism. The recoil of the AK-47 was well known. However, because the child had been practicing for a long time, his hands were very steady. He stood on the stairs on the second floor, as if he had gone crazy. He laughed wildly as he sprayed bullets downwards. The bullets swept the table, the windows, the furniture, and instantly tore everything into pieces. The 30 bullets were quickly used up. When the child put down the gun and looked at his masterpiece proudly, he suddenly realized that although it was a mess downstairs, the 2 people stood there without moving at all. After sighing softly, Chen-Shi turned his head and said to Qin Shihuiqing helplessly, "The bullets fired from the gun of a 14-year-old child are as deadly as the bullets fired from the gun of a 40-year-old man, maybe even more deadly." Qin Shihuiqing heard this sentence before. It was from the King of War. However, when this scene happened in front of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel very complicated. Chen-Shi did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the bullets that stopped in front of them all turned around, and then shot at the child on the stairs at a faster speed. The body was a child, but the heart was a demon, so can't stay. Originally, Chen-Shi came with the mentality of avenging his sister-in-law, but after being disturbed by this child, even he began to feel a little uncomfortable. The child was not wrong. It was the world that was wrong. Even a teenager was trained to be a demon that killed without batting an eyelid. This kind of behavior had completely infuriated him. After frowning and glancing at the stairs, Chen-Shi suddenly seemed to have noticed something. He quickly looked back at the door of the villa. Qin Shihuiqing saw his actions. While she was confused, Chen-Shi's figure had already disappeared from the hall. Almost at the same time, he was outside the villa. Chapter 160. Missiles were divided into strategic missiles and tactical missiles. The Tau anti-tank missile was a tactical missile. It was produced and used in large quantities during the Cold War. It could be launched from vehicles or helicopters, or it could be carried by infantry. It was mainly used to attack hard targets such as tanks, armored vehicles, bunkers, and artillery positions. The missile was 164 meters long, the diameter was 152 meters, and the total weight was 47 kilograms. In the unfinished Syrian war, a new tactic gradually became popular. As long as they encountered a fortification that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, they would directly bombard it with a Tau missile and blow it up together with the fortification. Simple and convenient. Of course, this tactic was patented by the rich. The price of a Tau anti-tank missile was about $60,000, which was equivalent to 10 AK-47s plus 100,000 bullets. And it was also equivalent to a BMW 5 Series. It sounded like a lot, but for drug dealers this small amount of money was nothing. When the Tau missile was just launched, its flying speed was only 65 meters per second, which was not as fast as a rocket launcher. But when the wings were unfolded and the propulsion device was activated, the flying speed would increase sharply and could exceed the speed of sound in a very short time. Because he was distracted by the child, Chen-Shi didn't notice the strangeness outside the house. By the time he reacted, the missile was already right in front of him. Boom! The sudden explosion instantly set off a burst of intense flames and thick smoke. The overwhelming flames covered more than half of the villa. Qin Xueqing rushed out of the villa to take a look. She saw Chen Shi standing at the door of the villa, his right hand raised in the air. A semicircular invisible shield blocked the flames and smoke set off by the explosion in the air. Qin Xueqing looked up and saw every detail. The raging flames above the villa looked terrifying, but it was like a monster locked in a glass room. It could only roar and wreak havoc outside. It was like watching a silent movie. The invisible shield even blocked the sound, so only the dancing flames in the sky could be seen, but no sound could be heard. Chen Shi withdrew his right hand, and some small flames fell from the sky. What followed were some pitch-black oil and debris, which were the remains of the missile. No need to search, the person is definitely not here. Huh. What do you mean? If I'm not wrong, this base is just a cover-up. After hearing his words, Qin Xueqing frowned and began to think. When she stood behind Chen Shi and was about to say something, Chen Shi suddenly jumped up from the ground and flew directly into the air. As he flew higher and higher, the topography of Meimen appeared clearly in front of Chen Shi. The base, the village, the sea of poppy flowers. From a high vantage point, he could see everything clearly. The base seemed to be very big, but there were not many people inside, which was very unreasonable. Moreover, as soon as they stepped into the villa, a missile was fired at them. This also meant that someone was definitely secretly observing them. Chen Shi was too lazy to play the game of cat and mouse with them, so he directly flew up. He wanted to see what other tricks this newly emerged drug lord had up his sleeve. Chen Shi hovered in the air, carefully observing every detail below. Because his divine sense had not been restored, he could only use this method to find the enemy's traces. While he was looking around, about 700 or 800 meters behind the base, there was a small soil slope. Suddenly, there was a slight noise from below the soil slope. Immediately afterward, a gate suddenly appeared on the soil slope. After the gate opened, something slowly rose from below. A missile launcher. Unlike the empty shelf in the center of the base, there were already 4 pottery missiles on it. In just a few seconds, the launcher was ready, and the warhead was aimed at Chen Shi in the sky. However, just as the first missile flew off the launcher, Chen Shi suddenly raised his right palm, and his palm was facing the missile. Just like a traffic policeman directing traffic, the missile suddenly stopped in mid-air. 2 seconds later, the missile's wings opened, and the propulsion device was fully activated. Accompanied by a strong and dazzling fire, the smoke at the tail of the missile became thicker and thicker, and its body began to tremble violently. However, no matter how hard the propulsion device tried, the missile could not fly forward. After another 3 seconds, just as the second missile was about to leave the launcher, Chen Shi suddenly clenched her fingers. He grasped the air. That invisible true essence seemed to have substance, and in an instant, it exploded the first missile, and also detonated the 3 missiles next to it. Boom! It shook the sky and the earth, and dust flew everywhere. The violent explosion instantly flattened the entire soil slope, and a huge cloud of smoke suddenly rose from below the soil slope. When the smoke and dust dispersed, the launcher hidden under the soil slope was completely exposed. Of course, only ruins were left. It had to be said that this drug lord called Bacha was indeed very creative, and he even specially built a fake base to attract the attention of the outside world. The Sea of Poppies was here, and this was the lifeblood of drug lords, so his base would not be too far away. Underground, Chen Shi looked down with interest, and then suddenly flew to a nearby soil slope. This was the largest soil slope in the vicinity, and it did not seem to have anything special. But with Chen Shi's eyesight, he could see that there was a trace of something strange in the middle of the soil slope. Found you. He raised his hand and blasted a stream of true essence. After the dust flew everywhere, a pitch-black hole was revealed from the bottom of the soil. It was an entrance about 5 meters long and 3 meters high, just like the entrance to the underground garage. At first glance, it was dark below. Chen Shi landed at the entrance of the hole, and then directly walked in. However, waiting for him was a group of fully armed soldiers. Intense gunshots suddenly rang out from underground, and the crazily gushing flames almost lit up the underground tunnel. A true essence barrier instantly appeared in front of Chunxi. Just like an umbrella, it blocked the bullets that rained down like a storm. All the bullets that flew in front of Chunxi strangely stopped in midair. In a short while, an iron wall made of bullets appeared in front of Chunxi. The afternoon sun shone in from outside the hole, and the soldiers stood at the bottom of the tunnel, so they could not see the figure of the person clearly. They looked up, and no matter how hard they tried, they could only see a vague shadow at the entrance of the tunnel. After estimating that even a tank would be penetrated, the soldiers stopped firing. At this time, Chunxi waved his hand. The wall of bullets in front of him suddenly turned into a rainstorm and shot at the people below. In an instant, the end of the tunnel became a hell on earth, and endless screams and wails echoed. Chunxi slowly walked down the tunnel. When he reached the bottom of the tunnel, there was no one alive. At this moment he was the incarnation of the god of death. Chapter 161. The explosion just now caught Qin Shihuiqing's attention. Although she couldn't fly, her running speed wasn't slow. As soon as Chunxi walked into the tunnel, she had already rushed over. Martial artists were too weak in the face of modern weapons. It was fine if it was an assassination, but when it came to a large-scale confrontation like this, she could only hide in the back and cheer. After all, she couldn't compare to a non-human existence, right? So even if she didn't want to admit defeat, she could only obediently hide behind Chunxi and follow her cheap brother-in-law to sweep through everything. The underground base was about the size of 3 or 4 football fields, about the same size as the fake base outside. The height of the entire space was at least 4 or 5 stories high, and it didn't feel oppressive at all. There weren't many people in the fake base because everyone was hiding here. As far as the eye could see, rows of military tents were placed in the open space, and many workers in white coats and masks were constantly coming in and out of the tents. Although there were many ventilation devices, the entire underground space was filled with a sour smell. This was because the purification of drugs required acetic acid. How was this a military base? It was clearly a huge drug manufacturing factory. At the same time, it was also an inexhaustible natural treasury. After Chunxi killed the soldiers at the end of the tunnel, he stepped into the air and walked directly over the pile of corpses. Qin Shihuiqing didn't have his ability, so she could only jump into the open space on the opposite side. Then they were surrounded. With the two of them as the center, hundreds of fully armed soldiers fanned out and pointed their guns at them. However, this time the other party seemed to have learned their lesson, so they didn't immediately attack. Chunxi glanced around. Wherever his gaze landed, the soldiers all retreated in fear. The originally slightly loose encirclement was expanded by his gaze just like that. Only one person didn't move. It was a middle-aged man with dark skin. He looked to be in his 40s and was about 1.8 meters tall. Compared to the Nanyang people around him, his height was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Respected celestial greetings. The middle-aged man's Chinese was much more standard than by Rongqing's, so Chunxi immediately frowned and asked, "Are you from Huaxia?" "No, I'm from Shan." "All right, as long as you're happy." Although he didn't want to admit it, most of the big drug lords in the Golden Triangle who wreaked havoc all over the world were actually Chinese. Even Kun Sa, who had almost unified the Golden Triangle, was from Dianzhou. This middle-aged man was Bacha, the leader of Mayman, a true warlord and drug lord. After hearing Chunxi's seemingly joking reply, Bacha immediately felt relieved. He quickly turned his head and gestured to the attendant beside him. "Respected celestial being, there's an old saying in Huaxia that goes, 'Those who don't know are not guilty.' I didn't know of your existence before, so I offended you. Please forgive me." As he spoke, Bacha's entourage brought 2 people forward. They were Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei, whom he had not seen for a long time. "And Mr. Chen?" "Mr. Chen." When Ning Zhonghua saw Chunxi, he was so excited that he almost couldn't speak. His complexion was yellowish and dark, and he had lost a lot of weight. The white shirt he was wearing had almost turned into a black shirt. Ning Zhonggua's expression was very emotional, but compared to Su Wei, it was a bit of a joke. After Su Wei saw Chunxi for the first time, he couldn't help but cry. He was considered a well-known business tycoon in Zhonghai, but at this moment, he was crying in front of thousands of people. It was easy to imagine what kind of grievances Su Wei had suffered. I'm sorry, the previous misunderstanding caused you two to suffer a lot. I would like to express my sincerest apologies to you too. I hope you don't take it to heart. While speaking, Bacha gestured for his men to untie them. As soon as the ropes were untied, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei rushed behind Chen Shi. As for what Bacha said just now, they didn't hear a single word. Qin Xueqing looked at the two with slight disdain, and then slightly distanced herself from them. Thinking about it, these two unlucky bastards were kidnapped all the way from Zhonghai to the Golden Triangle. They had to travel on land, and because of the Wu Lian's pursuit, they had to follow the group of Nanyang people over mountains and valleys. They were bitten by insects and snakes, but they had to wade in muddy water and swamps. If they couldn't keep up, they would be whipped. The two tycoons of the business world had lived like princes for most of their lives. During this trip, they truly experienced the suffering of the human world. This was probably the extent of the Red Army's long march. When they arrived at the Golden Triangle, they were locked in a dungeon. They ate, drank, and pooped in a room. They were no different from pigs in a pen. So, how could they not stink? Chen Shi stood in place and ignored the unlucky Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. Instead, he calmly continued to watch Bacha. When Bacha saw this, he didn't say anything else. He turned his head and said a few words to the attendant next to him. Not long after the attendant left, when he came back, he was pushing a trolley that looked like a food delivery trolley. The food delivery trolley was covered with a white cloth. When the attendant opened it, several heads were placed on top of it. These are the leaders of this operation. If you don't believe me, you can ask them to come out and identify. Bacha smiled and pointed at the food delivery trolley. It looked a bit like a staff member selling snacks and fruits on a train. Chen Shi finally saw the ruthlessness of a drug lord today. When the evil people in this world were truly ruthless, there was really no bottom line. After a deep sigh, Chen Shi suddenly asked, "Just now you wanted to fight. Now you want to surrender. Are you so sure that I'll let you go?" No, I'm not sure." Bacha shook his head and said calmly, "I didn't know that you were a celestial being, so I dared to offend you. Now that I know, I naturally have to change the way to solve the problem." "Solve the problem? How? With the people behind you?" After saying this, Chen Shi once again scanned the surroundings. As far as his eyes could see, the soldiers all retreated. At this moment, he was like Zhang Fei at the Changban slope. His roar scared Xia Hojie to death, and he alone forced the millions of Chao soldiers to retreat. After seeing his inhuman methods, the morale of the soldiers fell to the bottom. Because they weren't facing a human at all. How could they fight? However, Bacha seemed to have already expected Chen Shi's reaction. So after hearing Chen Shi's words, he didn't panic at all. Instead, as if he was making an introduction, he calmly said, "When I first built this underground base, I already buried 5,000 tons of explosives. 5,000 tons of explosives was equivalent to 8,000 Tomahawk missiles, which was also equivalent to a quarter of the Hiroshima nuclear explosion. And this was his trump card." Chapter 162. Chen Shi's expression didn't change at all when he heard that there were 5,000 tons of explosives buried here. Seeing this, Bacha continued, 5,000 tons of explosives isn't a threat. It's a means of self-protection. Just like a gecko cutting off its tail or a pufferfish bloating, it's an animal's instinct. Maybe you think this is ridiculous, but it's the only way I can protect myself. No one knew of your existence before, so I dared to offend you. I'm just following orders. I hope you can understand my difficulties. Bacha kept a low profile. Chen Shi didn't speak, as if he was thinking about something. But at this moment, there was a strange movement in the tunnel behind him. Qin Xueqing quickly looked back. Two gates suddenly extended out from the walls on both sides. The speed of the gate closing was very fast, and within a few seconds, it had already firmly closed together, completely sealing off their way back. Judging from this, Bacha was obviously prepared to fight to the death. Every celestial was a legendary existence. In fact, they couldn't be considered human anymore. After all, how could humans fly in the sky? Before receiving the mission, Bacha had a bad feeling. He thought he could take advantage of the recent turmoil in Wulian. But he didn't expect to kick an iron plate. No, it was a steel plate. Although a great grandmaster in the aura state could control objects with chi, this kind of celestial being who could pinch and explode missiles in the air could not even break the aura shield when faced with the suppressive firepower of a reinforced company, and could even shoot back all the bullets. Ba Cha was completely out of ideas. Since he couldn't beat them, he could only fight to the death. Anyway, a celestial's life was much more valuable than an ant's life. Ba Cha was a famous drug lord, so he had already put his life on the line. So after he made up his mind, a faint smile appeared on his face, as if victory was already in his hands. Celestials weren't afraid of missiles because missiles couldn't hit them. Now the entire base had become a sealed can. Once it exploded, the celestials in the center of the explosion were no different from ants like them. They would still turn into ashes. However, just as Ba Cha was feeling proud of himself, Chinchi smiled faintly. Have you played Fight the Landlord? Ba Cha was stunned. He didn't expect him to suddenly ask such a question. Before Ba Cha could answer, Chinchi directly asked a second question. Do you know what's bigger than a king bomb? Bigger than a king bomb. Ba Cha was confused. He thought there was a deeper meaning in Chinchi's words, so he immediately thought carefully about it. For twos? No, in Fight the Landlord, the king bomb was the biggest card? He was still pondering. Chinchi had already given him an answer. Let me tell you. Bigger than a king bomb. Flipped the table as his voice, Chinchi's words, and the other he's of st before they could react. They were dragged by Chinchi and flew straight up the tunnel. At this moment, Ba Cha finally reacted. At this time he no longer had any expression of victory, only a face of impatience. He kept roaring at the soldiers, "Beat them! Don't let them get away!" When the nervous soldiers heard his roar, they were so scared that they immediately pulled the trigger. They didn't even see a shadow before they started shooting. Intense gunshots instantly resounded throughout the entire base. However, Chinchi was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already dragged the three of them to the door that isolated the exit. A long sword condensed from true essence suddenly appeared in his hand. The long sword pierced through the gate. The gate, which was comparable to the gate of a vault, was as soft as a cake. The sword pierced through it without any resistance. With a twist of his right hand, Chinchi instantly cut a large hole in the door. The cave was not big, only a little more than a meter in diameter. Chinchi led the three of them out of the cave, and then soared into the sky. Ba Cha hurriedly led his men to the end of the passage. Looking up, the sunlight was constantly shining through the hole into the passage. Where were the figures of those people? Scram! Seeing this, Ba Cha immediately panicked. He turned around and ran into the depths of the base. All the soldiers in front of him were fiercely slapped to the side. Ba Cha didn't lie. There were indeed 5,000 tons of explosives buried under the base. He originally wanted to use this as a threat to reach an agreement with the other party. After all, the Celestials were legendary existences. Their status determined that they couldn't be people who would go back on their words. Once the other party agreed to an agreement, the next step would be easy to discuss. He used his trump card, not because he didn't want to live, but because he had no other choice. Retreating in order to advance, trading life for life. The effective killing radius of 5,000 tons of explosives was about 160 meters. It sounded very small, but it had to be known that this was only the direct killing range of the explosion. The explosion would also cause a shockwave, and this shockwave would have a killing radius of 1 kilometer. In other words, once the 5,000 tons of explosives exploded, with the base as the center, a radius of 1 kilometer would be a dangerous area. The other party threw out a sentence that didn't make any sense, then turned around and ran. No matter how stupid Ba Cha was, he understood the other party's intention. Flip the table. Explosives. He wanted to blow up the base. Although the base was filled with explosives, it couldn't be detonated without a detonator. After all, the other party was a celestial. Who knew if he had some mysterious means like the boss? Ba Cha didn't dare to gamble, so his first reaction was to run, as far as he could. Old Dog tied the horse to the side, then sat on a rock and smoked in boredom. He had heard the explosion just now, so he couldn't help but sigh. Those two young people were indeed Wu Lian. They broke into the Golden Triangle alone and started a fight just because of a disagreement. Judging from the noise just now, they probably blew up some building. Old Dog wasn't in a hurry to go home this time. Because they did have some ability, maybe they wanted to cause a disturbance first, then take action. In that case, he would wait until it was dark. If they still didn't come out when it was dark, then don't blame him for running away. He couldn't stay in Maoping village anymore. After going back this time, it was best to hide in Yuebei for a while. Just as Old Dog was thinking about his next plan, he suddenly heard a noise coming from the hillside not far away. He turned his head and saw that it was the woman just now. The woman and two middle-aged men. Looking at their unlucky faces, Old Dog knew that they must be the hostages that had just been rescued. Oh, rescued? Old Dog stood up and greeted Qin Xueqing with a smile. Qin Xueqing didn't talk nonsense with him. Before she walked down the hillside, she said to him directly, "Let them get on the horses. We have to leave here quickly." Old Dog's face changed when he heard that. He hurriedly asked, "Have Ba Cha's men caught up with us?" Qin Xueqing ignored him and signaled Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei to get on the horse. Then she started to run along the road they came from. "Hey, wait for us." Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei were too slow. After Old Dog pushed them onto the horse, he led the horse and quickly chased after them. The few of them ran wildly on the mountain road. But after running for a few minutes, a light suddenly exploded, followed by a violent vibration behind them. Old Dog was surprised and couldn't help but look back. Chapter 163. What did you guys do? Old Dog's eyes almost fell out of their sockets when he saw the mushroom cloud rising into the sky. He turned around and was about to say something to Qin Xueqing when the ground shook violently. There were many mountains in the Golden Triangle. After the explosion, the nearby mountains shook violently. The sudden shaking startled the horse. It neighed and raised its front hooves. If Old Dog had not pulled the horse back in time, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei would have been thrown off the horse. The explosion happened underground. 5,000 tons of explosives was theoretically enough to trigger a magnitude 4 earthquake. Because the speed of sound was much slower than earthquake waves and light waves, Old Dog only heard the earth-shattering explosion after about 10 seconds. It was like a muffled thunder in summer. It was loud and continuous, resounding through the sky. Old Dog was so frightened that he jumped up. Even the Old Dog was scared, let alone the animals. In an instant, all the birds in the forest were frightened and flew out of the forest. They covered the sky and the earth, even blocking the sunlight. The birds flapped their wings. It was as if it was raining. The horse whined and raised its hooves to gallop away. Old Dog was not paying attention, and the reins slipped out of his hands. The horse rushed forward with Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei on it. Ning Zhonghua hugged the horse's neck tightly, while Su Wei hugged Ning Zhonghua's waist tightly. The two unlucky fellows sat on the horse's back, shouting for help as they were carried away by the horse. The tremor lasted for about a minute. Unlike when they came, the four of them were running all the way back. So after a while, they returned to the small village from which they came. Because of the big explosion just now, the villagers in the village were so frightened that they all ran out. The adults and children were all gathered together, chattering about something that no one knew what. Qin Xueqing saw Chen Shi standing in the sea of poppy flowers at a glance. He seemed to be thinking about something. Qin Xueqing came close behind him. After pondering for a moment, she suddenly asked, "You want to destroy these things?" Hearing this, Chen Shi sighed deeply. Then he smiled and said, "I did have such a plan just now. But after thinking about it carefully, I realized I really don't have that ability." Even the moon had been conquered, yet humans were defeated by a small plant. Was he really unable to resist it? Actually, that wasn't the case. Drugs were easy to suppress, but not the human heart. Put out the poppies, marijuana, morphine, cocaine. Even if these plants were completely wiped out, humans would still research new types of chemical drugs. He could destroy Maimon and the Golden Triangle, but he could not call back the hearts of those who had abandoned themselves. Qin Xueqing understood what Chen Shi meant. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she suddenly took out her phone and mumbled to herself, "But seriously, this place is really beautiful. I have to take a picture as a souvenir. As she spoke, Qin Xueqing took a picture of everything in front of her. Click. The blue sky, the white clouds, and the endless sea of bright red flowers. Chen Xi's back was particularly prominent in the sea of flowers. There are flowers in the world like a sea. Stay in one place and don't let them drift. But the fragrance of jade, the silky and exquisite figure, chasing after the sun in the warm red clouds. Shangjing Hohai. The twin brothers went home for dinner. As soon as they left, only the mother and daughter were left in the shop. 4 or 5-year-old children were naughty. As soon as the brothers left, the little girl couldn't sit still. Seeing that Qin Shi still didn't know when he would come back, Qin Ruoying made a very wise decision. She closed the shop and went home. The TV at home could play cartoons on demand, and the yard had been repaired, so Nian could ride the big cat in the yard again. If it really didn't work, she could still play hide and seek with Nian for a while. Anyway, as long as the child played, she wouldn't look for her father for a while. There were only 3 tables of guests today. After Qin Ruoying cleaned up the tea house, she called Nian to go home. Now that the little girl had a new toy, it was the time for her to love it. She and the brothers built Lego blocks in the morning, so in the afternoon, she naturally had to study her Barbie doll. In the winter in Shangjing, it got dark earlier and earlier. It wasn't even 5 o'clock yet, but the sky seemed a bit hazy. The mother and daughter walked to the door of the tea house. As soon as they opened the door, a gust of cold wind hit them in the face. It was snowing outside again. Qin Ruoying turned to close the door. The little girl stood obediently beside her, holding her Barbie doll and playing with it. The little girl was still young, so her playing was very rough. She didn't think about how to match the doll. Instead, she constantly twisted the Barbie doll's limbs and made a variety of abnormal shapes. The mother and daughter didn't notice that Qin Shi had come back. Because there were no passers-by nearby, Qin Shi landed directly on the street outside the tea house. Nian wore a white down jacket today, a pair of brown cotton boots on her feet, and a pink wool thermal hat on her head. She looked round and very cute. Qin Ruoying also wore a white down jacket, which was a parent-child outfit with Nian. She didn't wear a hat, and her beautiful black hair naturally hung down to her shoulders, which she casually tied together with a rubber band. Chen Shi didn't disturb them. When Qin Ruoying closed the door and turned to take Nian home, she suddenly saw Chen Shi on the street. It seemed that she was startled by the sudden appearance of Chen Shi. Qin Ruoying immediately rolled her eyes at him. At this time, the little girl also looked up and saw Chen Shi. "Papa, you're back." With a clear sound of "Papa," the little girl let go of Qin Ruoying's hand, waved her arms and ran toward Chen Shi. Chen Shi quickly squatted down and held the little girl in his arms. After Chen Shi stood up with her in his arms, the little girl sat in Chen Shi's arms and handed the Barbie doll to Chen Shi. She pouted and said coquettishly, "Papa, dolls are not fun." Looking at the Barbie doll that was twisted like a fried dough twist, Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He quickly comforted her. "You can't play with Barbie dolls like this. Papa will teach you later, okay?" "Okay." The little girl nodded happily. In fact, she didn't care much about what she played. She cared more about who would play with her. Qin Ruoying came over, and Chen Shi quickly freed his left hand to hold her hand. "Where's Yuanqing?" "She's in Spring City. She'll be back tomorrow." "Is she all right?" "She's fine. It's just a broken hand. She'll recover when she reaches the gold core stage." "How long will it take?" "With her diligence, I don't think it'll take long." "That's true. I want to eat braised lion's head." A noise suddenly came from the middle, interrupting the couple's conversation. It turned out that the little girl was a little unhappy because they kept talking and neglected her. "Okay, Papa will make it for you. What else do you want to eat?" "Kung Pao chicken." "Okay, what else?" "Pork ribs, sweet and sour pork ribs." "Okay, Papa will make it for you. Papa is the best." "What about Mommy?" "Mommy is good too." Chapter 164. Life went back to its normal routine. The couple spent all day around the little girl, and the little girl was clamoring to go to the tea house every day. The reason why she insisted on going to the tea house every day was because she wanted to play with the twins. Therefore, the tea house by Hohai Lakeside opened punctually every day even though business wasn't good. There were only a few customers, and they couldn't even cover the water and electricity bills, not to mention the rent. The so-called building a house in the human realm without the noise of carriages and horses. What can a gentleman do? His heart is biased. This was already the realm described by Tao Yuanming. Nowadays, many people yearn for this kind of life, not to mention whether they were really artistic or not. This kind of life was easy to achieve, but that kind of transcendent state of mind was not something everyone could have. Therefore, even Gu Lao couldn't help but sigh sometimes. This couple was really like an old man in a young man's skin. Chen Shi had stayed in heavenly spiral for 500 years. Although he spent most of his time cultivating, he had lived for 500 years after all. With his current lifestyle, he would be despised by the sect if he were to stay in heavenly spiral. He didn't want to improve himself, he was willing to degrade himself, and he took pleasure in it. As for Qin Ruoying, if her identity as a Xian Nu was not taken away, she could barely be considered an ordinary person. However, she had been indifferent since she was young. As a Xian Nu, she yearned for the life of an ordinary person. The most exciting time in her life was the few years when she met Chen Shi. Such a pair of husband and wife was truly a rare existence in modern life. Plato once said, "Each of us is only half a person, so each of us is always looking for the other half to combine with himself." In a person's life, about 2 million people will pass by. The probability of two strangers meeting and falling in love is 0.000049. Meeting didn't mean knowing each other didn't mean knowing each other, and knowing each other didn't mean love. Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying were very lucky because they met, knew each other, and fell in love. Even more lucky was that they had a product of their love. Just like the casual game Traveling Frog, which became popular overnight throughout the country. Nian Nian was the little frog that Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying raised together. Nian Nian was still young, so her biggest hobby was to play. When she grew up, perhaps she would be like this little frog. She would bring her own lotus leaf hat and luggage, then bid farewell to her parents and travel to the outside world alone. Along the way, who would Nian Nian meet? What kind of novel things would she see? What kind of life experiences would she have? As parents, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying knew nothing about this. Children would eventually grow up, and Nian Nian would eventually become an independent existence. They would not be able to interfere too much, so they could only place their concern and longing for her. The popularity of the traveling frog was due to the subtle relationship between parents and their children. In a small tea house by the lakeside of Hohai, a happy and blissful family. In a leisurely life in the garden, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying were waiting. When Nian Nian grew up and became the little frog that liked to travel. December 6th, light snow. The little girl sat in the children's playground and threw the blocks in her hands in boredom. She built a castle out of building blocks and wanted to show it off to others, but the brothers never came. She had no choice but to call the big cat. Big cat. Big cat. The big cat may have been lazy recently. It lay on the bar all day without moving, as if it was about to hibernate. After hearing the little fellow's cry, the big cat reluctantly meowed. It then jumped up from the bar and landed beside the little fellow with a few big leaps. "Big cat, I'll build a castle for you." Meow. After a lazy response, the big cat curled up on the climbing mat and let the little girl surround it with blocks. According to the big cat's size, the little girl was busy. She was also experienced in this recently, so it didn't take her long to build a castle and cover the big cat inside. Looking at her masterpiece, the little girl couldn't help clapping her hands and giggling. "How about the big cat? Do you like it?" Meow. In the doorway of the building castle, the big cat narrowed its eyes and meowed casually, then fell asleep again. The little girl lay on the mat, tilted her head and glanced at the big cat in the castle. Seeing that it didn't cooperate at all, she suddenly lost interest. Gu Lao must have been delayed by something today, so he didn't bring the twins. Without the company of the two brothers, the little girl was obviously not used to it. She sat on the cushion and thought for a while. Then she suddenly stood up and ran to Qin Ruoying's side without even putting on her shoes. Qin Ruoying was reading a book. When she saw her coming, She immediately picked her up and asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, what's wrong?" "Mama, when will my brothers come? Do they not want to play with me anymore?" The little girl pouted and looked wronged. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only smile helplessly and said, "My brothers have something to do, so they can't play with you today. Wait until tomorrow, they will come again tomorrow." Chunshi was changing the water in the kettle. Seeing the little girl's dejected look, he immediately interrupted and said, "Nian Nian, it's rare that you're free today, why don't we take you out to play?" "Where are we going? How about going to the mall to eat KFC?" Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up, and she immediately responded, "Okay, I want to eat KFC." "Then you go and put on your shoes. When you're done, we'll go out." "Okay." The little girl ran back to put on her shoes. Chunshi's cooking was much better than KFC's, and the little girl was just looking for something new. Qin Ruoying naturally didn't have any objections to eating a meal once in a while, so she let it be. The tea house closed early again. The family of 3 stepped on the light snow and walked to Dongming Alley. When they passed by the courtyard, Chunshi suddenly asked Qin Ruoying to wait for him, and then ran into the courtyard like a wisp of smoke. After waiting for a while, Chunshi came out again. When Qin Ruoying saw his secretive look, she knew that he must be up to something again. Thus she looked at him with a faint smile, waiting for him to explain himself. Seeing this, Chunshi didn't hide anything and immediately took out 2 things from behind her. Dang dang dang, when Qin Ruoying saw it, she suddenly did not know whether to laugh or cry. Chunshi held the household register in his hand, one for her, and the other for Chunshi and Nian Nian. After seeing the household register, Qin Ruoying understood what he wanted to do, so she asked with a smile, "Do you still care about these things?" "Of course, we have a child illegally living together, so we have to make up for it." At this time, the little girl grabbed the household register in Chunshi's hand, and then curiously turned it over. "Papa, what is this?" She did not know how to read, so she pointed to the 5 characters on it and asked, "Household register. Come on, Papa will teach you how to read." Holding the little girl in his arms, Chunshi pointed to the Chinese characters on the household register and taught her to read. The family of 3 walked out of the alley. When they were about to walk out of the alley, Qin Ruoying suddenly could not help looking back at the familiar alley. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the past. At that time, she would walk through this alley every day. But at that time, she did not think. Chapter 165. After the family of 3 left Dongming Alley, Chunshi took a taxi and went straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The Civil Affairs Bureau was a magical place. Compared to the Human Resources and Social Security Bureau, the Civil Affairs Bureau was much more leisurely. The door was open, and anyone could come and go. What was even more amazing was that next to the marriage counter was the divorce counter. They went in and came out. They went in again and came out again. Countless gratitude and grudges, and endless expressions of all living beings. Today was not a big day, and the weather was not good, so there were not many people who came to go through the formalities. As soon as the family of 3 walked into the hall, countless eyes fell on them. It couldn't be helped. Compared to ordinary people, Chunshi and Qin Ruoying's looks were too high. Some people who did not know the situation even thought that they were an unknown celebrity couple. What was even more eye-catching was that Chunshi was holding a lively and cute little girl in his arms. The child was already so big, but they still came to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Obviously, they were here to go through the divorce procedures. The young couple looked quite compatible. They were probably young and immature, so they got married and divorced impulsively. This kind of thing was common in the Civil Affairs Bureau. What a pity! Countless people secretly sighed. However, what made everyone's jaws drop was, Chunshi did not take the divorce registration number, but the marriage registration number. When he came to the marriage registration counter with the number, the staff around him could not help but look at him. It was not unheard of to get on the bus first and then buy the ticket, but it was really rare to see someone come to buy the ticket when they were almost at the terminal. There were very few people getting married today, so it was Chunshi's turn immediately. He put the little fellow down, and then he and Qin Ruoying held the little fellow's hand as they walked to the counter. The Civil Affairs Bureau was under the control of the local government, so the policies and charging standards were slightly different in each place. It was okay in Shangjing. Taking the number, filling in the form, taking photos, and getting the certificate cost 9 yuan, and taking photos 30 yuan. As long as the procedures were complete, they could get the marriage certificate in 20 minutes. When Chen-shi got 2 brand new marriage certificates from the registration counter, a very strange feeling suddenly surged from his heart. They got married just like that. Unlike the excitement of a wedding, when they were getting their marriage certificate, they felt an indescribable heaviness. This was not a derogatory term, but a complimentary one. It was a very complicated feeling. Perhaps it was his sense of responsibility. He looked at the marriage certificate in his hand, and then looked at his lover beside him. Even the look in his eyes was slightly different. Chen-shi wanted to show the marriage certificate to Qin Ruoying, but the little girl in her arms snatched it away. The little fellow looked at her parents in the photo and giggled for a while. Then she suddenly stopped smiling and pouted at Chen-shi. "Papa, why am I not in the photo?" Without waiting for Chen-shi to reply, she seemed to have thought of something and immediately shouted, "Family portrait! Family portrait! I want to be in there too." This was a public place. Besides those who were preparing to get married, there were also those who were preparing to get divorced. Many people were already in a bad mood, so when they heard her words, their faces immediately darkened. "Shu, you can't be loud in public." Qin Ruoying quickly stopped the little fellow. Showing affection in this place was simply rubbing salt on other people's wounds, so it was better to restrain herself. In order to meet the little fellow's request, the couple quickly took her to a corner, and then Chen-shi took out his mobile phone. Click. The couple leaned close to each other. The little fellow sat in the middle of them, holding her little face with both hands and sticking out her little tongue to make a face. Looking at this family portrait, both of them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The little fellow took the mobile phone from Chen-shi. When she saw herself in the mobile phone, she immediately seemed to have succeeded in a prank and couldn't help but giggle. Just as the 3 of them were showing off their love, a couple in front of the divorce counter started arguing. Marriage required a photo of the 2 people, and divorce required a photo of 1 person. Because the size of the photo provided by the woman was not up to standard, there was no way to go through the formalities. So the man asked the woman to go out and take another photo. The woman was unwilling, so the 2 of them quarreled in the hall. "You're deliberately looking for trouble, aren't you? You've done it twice and you still can't get it done. Let me tell you, I don't want to do it a 3rd time. Are you in such a hurry to marry that vixen?" The man's attitude was very bad, so the woman's mood immediately rose, and she opened her mouth to retort. Their voices were very loud, and they immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. When the man heard the woman's words, he was so angry that even his face turned red, so he roared angrily, "Watch your mouth. At this point, both of us know what's going on. Don't embarrass yourself here with me." The woman was stunned. After hesitating for a moment, she suddenly threw herself into the man's arms. Then the woman cried bitterly as she lay in the man's arms and murmured, "I don't want a divorce. I don't want it. Let's start over, okay? Okay." The man was also stunned. Looking at the most familiar stranger in front of him, the oath he once made immediately echoed in his ears. After all, she was the person he was most familiar with. After a deep sigh, the man didn't push the woman away, but gently hugged her. At this moment, the staff at the counter smiled and said, "Why don't you 2 go back and think about it?" She came twice, but she even got the size wrong. Was this woman really that stupid? It was because she didn't want a divorce. Looking for trouble. This was the last way she could think of to delay it. However, after hearing the staff's words, the man gently shook his head. He whispered a few words to the woman, then pulled her out of the hall. This kind of episode happened almost every day, so the staff had long been numb to it. Seeing that the man and woman seemed to be in a dilemma for a while, he directly called the next number. The little girl looked at the scene in front of her in a daze. With her young mind, she really couldn't understand the complexity of it. After seeing the man and woman leave, the little girl raised her head and asked in confusion, "Why is Auntie crying?" Because she's going to be separated from Uncle. Why does Uncle want to be separated from Auntie? Chunshi didn't know how to answer. After hesitating for a moment, he had to smile and rub the little girl's head, and then very stiffly changed the topic. Come, let Dad hug you and let Mom rest. We're done with our business. Now I'll take you to eat KFC. Are you happy? Yes. As soon as she heard about KFC, the little girl fell into the trap. After obediently climbing into Chunshi's arms, she began to talk about what she wanted to eat later. Then, under the envious eyes of many people, Chunshi held the little girl in one hand and Qin Ruoying in the other hand, and slowly walked out of the marriage registration office. Marriage was like a carved ship. It depended on how you appreciated it and how you steered it. If you were wise, even if you didn't know your lover before marriage, you could be respectful to your lover after marriage. Chapter 166. Using KFC as bait, Chunshi took the little fellow out. After getting the marriage certificate, the family of 3 took a taxi and went straight to the World Trade Center. When Chunshi brought the little fellow to Shangjing last time, the father and daughter mostly went to scenic spots. This time, when they suddenly came to the shopping mall, the little fellow was immediately dazzled by the dazzling lineup of shops on both sides of the street. There were many big shopping malls in Shangjing, and the World Trade Center's Heaven Staircase was relatively unique, because it had a semi-closed pedestrian street, and above the pedestrian street, there was a 250-meter-long LED electronic light screen. In the evening, the sky screen would begin to play various videos, so there were often marriage proposals here. For 3,000 yuan, you could play a 3-minute proposal video on the sky screen. When the video suddenly played, the moment of romance could really melt anyone. Therefore, it was rumored that the success rate of marriage proposals here was particularly high. It was still early, and it was winter, so the World Trade Center's Heaven Staircase looked a little deserted. The couple took the little fellow around, and then went into a children's experience hall. The children's experience hall was very large, and as soon as they entered, they saw a huge Tyrannosaurus Rex. The little fellow was startled by the vivid Tyrannosaurus Rex. After coming back to her senses, she immediately asked Chunshi to put her down, and then ran to the Tyrannosaurus Rex, tiptoed and shook hands with it. While shaking hands with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the little fellow turned back and asked, "Papa, what is this?" "It's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, an extinct animal, so you can't see it in the zoo." "Oh." The little fellow surrounded the Tyrannosaurus Rex and studied it carefully. Chunshi watched her, and Qin Ruoying turned around to buy her a ticket. After playing with the Tyrannosaurus Rex for a while, the little fellow ran back to Chunshi, and then pulled him into play. This Tyrannosaurus Rex had attracted her attention, so she was very interested in the things inside the experience hall. The floor of the children's experience hall was cushioned, so shoes could not be worn in. After changing shoes, the family of 3 walked into the entertainment area. After entering the door, there was a large sand pit. The sand was carefully selected fine sand. The little fellow changed into her boots and jumped in directly. In the sand pit, there was an excavator toy that was especially popular in the past 2 years. Under Chunshi's guidance, the little girl successfully operated the excavator to dig out a pile of sand and put it into the hopper truck. Then, she happily rolled around in the sand pile. As a professional children's experience center, there were too many toys here. There were children's castles, children's rock climbing, small tunnels and combination maze slides. There was everything that one could think of, but there was nothing that one could not see. After playing one round, the little guy was already so tired that he was dripping with sweat. Even his underwear was soaked with sweat. In order to let her rest, the couple continued to bring her inside, and came to the painting area. The little girl had learned to draw in kindergarten, so when she got the coloring board, she sat on the stool obediently and studied it. Chunshi and Qin Ruoying sat on either side of her, and watched her casually paint on the drawing board with a watercolor pen. In just a short while, the perfectly fine Sun Wukong was smeared all over by her. Looking at her masterpiece, the little fellow was very proud. She handed it to Qin Ruoying as if it was a treasure, and asked her to praise her. Qin Ruoying and Chunshi did not know whether to laugh or cry. Then Qin Ruoying taught her step by step and wrote her name in the blank space of the drawing board. She was going to show it to her when she grew up. The handwriting was crooked, like earthworms crawling around. It took a lot of effort to barely distinguish what she wrote. Chen Yan. For the whole afternoon, the family of 3 was immersed in the experience center. If the little fellow was not hungry, she probably would not have been willing to come out. Before leaving, the little fellow was really conflicted. After Chen, she bought her a bear that was half her height. The little fellow reluctantly left the children's experience center with the bear. When they walked out of the experience center, the sky was completely dark. At this time, the world staircase really showed its unique charm. Flowing lights and colorful neon lights flashed. A giant screen with an area of 7,500 square meters was constantly blooming above the pedestrian street. The little fellow stood on the steps, holding the teddy bear. When she looked up and saw the underwater world animation on the sky screen, she could not help but open her mouth and exclaim, "Papa, is that a dolphin?" "And yes, a dolphin." "What about that white one?" "It's a whale." "Is that a tortoise?" "Kind of, but you should call it a sea turtle." "Oh." The little fellow nodded her head woodenly. Chunxi's science was no different from a book to her. In order to let the little fellow see more clearly, the couple took her directly to the bottom of the sky screen. But at this time, the little fellow saw the Christmas tree in the middle of the pedestrian street. It was a large silver Christmas tree 8 meters tall, surrounded by plush snowmen and mini plush deer. The Christmas tree shone with silver light and looked particularly dazzling. The little fellow ran to the fence and wanted to reach over the fence to touch the plush snowman next to her, but was stopped by Qin Ruoying in time. "Nian Nian, don't climb over the fence without permission, understand?" "Oh," hearing her mother's words, the little fellow nodded obediently and then stepped back. In order to prevent the little fellow from running around again, Qinshi held her in his arms and asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, it's time to eat. Let's come out to play after dinner, okay?" "Okay." "Then what do you want to eat? It's all food here." Hearing this, the little fellow sat in his arms and twisted her body to look around. Actually, the child only ate KFC for novelty. After coming out to play for so long, she naturally had long forgotten about KFC. She could not read, so she looked around and did not see anything. Seeing that she did not have any ideas, Chunshi turned to look at Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying pondered for a moment, then pointed to the boiling fish village not far away and said with a smile, "How about that one? It seems to be Sichuan cuisine. It should be good." Aunt Zhang was from Chengdu, and both mother and daughter grew up eating her cooking. Naturally, they had a special feeling for Sichuan cuisine. The rent in the World Trade Center was very expensive, so the consumption level was naturally high. The decoration of this restaurant was very luxurious, and the environment was even better than Sally's restaurant in Zhonghai. Boiled fish, gluttonous frog, husband and wife lung slice, saliva chicken, spicy pork trotters, and all of them were spicy. The child was still young, so Qin Ruoying specifically asked for less chili, just a little spicy. But even so, the little fellow's face was red from the spiciness. She kept sucking in the cold air, but her mouth did not stop for a moment, and she kept shouting that it was delicious. She was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. She shouted that it was delicious, but she could not eat much before she was full. Qin Ruoying could not eat much either. Looking at the table full of leftovers, Chunshi had to ask the waiter to pack it up. After eating, the little fellow seemed to be tired. After she handed the toy bear to Qin Ruoying, she obediently shrank in Chunshi's arms. In just a short while he had already fallen into a deep sleep. Chapter 167. The next morning, when Qin Ruoying got up and washed up, Chunshi was already busy in the yard. He dug another hole in the bluestone floor that had just been paved. After glancing at the little guy who was still sleeping soundly, Qin Ruoying quietly walked out of the west wing. When she came to Chunshi's side, she found that Chunshi had gotten a jar from somewhere. He was squatting next to the jar, busy with something. After noticing that Qin Ruoying came over, Chunshi looked back at her, picked up a bowl from the side, and scooped some wine from the jar with the bowl. Qin Ruoying just took the bowl from him and a fragrant smell of wine rose directly from the bowl and hit her nose. The smell of the wine was very light, and there was a slight indescribable fragrance in it. This is wine. Yes, have a taste. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying picked up the bowl and took a sip. She didn't drink and didn't know much about wine, but with this sip, she could still feel a fragrant but not overpowering, mellow and elegant taste from it. In the unique spicy taste of white wine, there was a clear, refreshing, mellow and clean taste. It was really soft in the mouth, and the aftertaste was pleasant. It was very delicious. What wine is this? Daughters read. How is it? My skills are good, right? You can make wine? Of course, your husband knows everything, and there is nothing he can't do. Chunshi smiled proudly. Qin Ruoying smiled and glanced at the empty wine bottle beside him, but didn't say anything. Mao Tai, Fengjiu, Luzhou, Laojiu, Shifengjiu, the 4 famous wines of Huaxia were all taken by him. In addition, there was also Wuliangye, Guojiu 1573, Jian Nanshan, and so on. No matter what type of wine it was, whether it was Mao Tai flavored, Qingfeng flavored, or Feng flavored, they were all put into a soil jar by Qin Shi. This was a jar of wine that gathered the great achievements of all kinds of wine. Soaked wine. The wine was not important. What was important was the spirit medicine within. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that every drop was a great supplement in the world. 1 drop was equivalent to a Peiyuan Dan. After being refined by Qin Shi with her immortal techniques, the wine could truly be considered the so-called nectar of the bejeweled nectar. After the wine entered his mouth, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth contained in it flowed through his throat and into his limbs. Qin Ruoying only felt that the more she drank, the more sober she became. In a short while, she drank the entire bowl of wine into her stomach. Seeing that she liked it very much, Qin Shi asked with a smile, "Would you like another bowl?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying thought for a moment and shook her head. She chuckled and said, "This is not the time to drink new or hong. Let's bury it. When Nian Nian gets married in the future, we'll have a drink together." All right. After covering the jar and putting it into the hole under the locust tree, Qin Shi set up a spirit gathering formation and a spirit binding formation around it. In order to prevent it from being accidentally destroyed, Qin Shi even set up a defensive formation. What a joke. This was the new, or hong that he had specially brewed for Nian Nian. What if it was stolen? As early as 304 AD, the world's first botanist, Ji Han, wrote the description of southern vegetation. It said that when a woman was a few years old, she would brew wine. When a woman was about to get married, she would prepare wine for the guests. It was called nu, or hong, and the taste was absolutely delicious. After giving birth to a daughter, she would brew a jar of nu, or hong, and hide it under the osmanthus tree at home. When she was free, she would step under the osmanthus tree a few times, as if her heart would feel more at ease. The daughter's hair would be tied with a red headband. Her eyebrows and eyes would be like willow leaves during the Qingming festival. She would become more beautiful and bigger day by day. When the daughter got married, the father would dig out this jar of wine as a dowry. According to the customs of ancient times, the first 3 bowls of wine that the daughter scooped out of the jar would be presented to her father-in-law, and her husband. The meaning was that she prayed for the family to be healthy and prosperous. Daughters were the treasures of fathers. When he thought that Nian Nian would grow up and get married in the future, Qin Shi felt like the cabbage that he had worked so hard to grow had been eaten by a pig. Many people felt that it was a loss to have a daughter, but they never thought that other people's pigs had eaten their cabbage, but it was because of this cabbage that other people's pigs had become their pigs. Of course, this was just a joke. After all, the idea of favoring boys over girls was not as serious as before. After using soil to cover the jar, Qin Shi restored the tiles on the ground to normal. No one would be able to tell that there was a jar of wine buried under the ground. He turned around and was about to call Qin Ruoying back to the room when Qin Ruoying looked thoughtfully at the east wing and asked, "It's been 3 days. Why hasn't Yuan Qing returned yet?" "She's probably delayed by other things. Don't worry, she'll be fine." After indicating that Qin Ruoying did not need to worry, Qin Shi led her back to the west wing. Perhaps it was because she was too tired from playing yesterday, so it was already past 9 in the morning, but the little fellow was still asleep. It was rare for the little fellow to sleep so soundly, so the couple did not wake her up. Instead, they sat in the other corner of the room and let Chen-shi guide Qin Ruoying's cultivation. Qin Ruoying's cultivation was also slacking. Even if Chen-shi gave her all kinds of cheats, she had only just stepped into the early stage of qi refinement after cultivating for so long. She was not anxious at all. When it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, the little guy finally let out a whimper. During this time, Qin Ruoying had been taking care of her. After hearing the little fellow's moans, Qin Ruoying immediately stopped cultivating and quickly walked to the bedside. "Nian, are you awake?" "Ugh," the little fellow did not speak. She mumbled and rolled on the bed. After she moved her body and was almost awake, Qin Ruoying picked her up from the bed and went straight to the bathroom. Probably because she slept for too long, the little fellow did not come back to her senses for a long time. After washing up, she directly lay on Qin Ruoying's shoulder and continued to sleep listlessly. When Chen-shi saw her unlucky appearance, he could not help but pinch her little face, and then took a crystal bun and waved it in front of her eyes. Oh! With delicious food in front of her, the little fellow finally became energetic and stretched out her neck to take a bite. But at this time, Chen-shi suddenly retracted his hand, making her bite empty air. The little fellow pouted and was about to be unhappy. Chen-shi hurriedly stuffed the bun into her mouth. "Is it delicious?" "Delicious." When the bun entered her mouth, there was a strong fragrance. She was also greedy. She bit off more than half of it in one bite. Her mouth was like a hamster's mouth, round and very cute. "Eat slowly, don't choke." Qin Ruoying touched her head, then put her on the chair and let her eat. At this time, Chen-shi's phone suddenly rang. He picked up the phone and saw that it was a call from Gu Lao. "Hello, Gu Lao. Boss Chen, why are you not open today?" "Hey," the child slept in and delayed the opening. "Please wait a moment, we will come right away." "Okay, then we will wait outside for a while." Today the little fellow got up too late. The old man came with the twins, but the tea house was not open yet. So he called to ask about the situation. Chen-shi thought that it was not good to let the old man and the children stand outside in the cold wind on this cold day. So he left to open the door for them. The retired old man's life was indeed very leisurely. Basically, he would come to have a cup of tea when he had nothing to do. It was not that the tea was delicious, but because the children could find something to play here. He did not have to worry about them, so he was happy to be leisurely. Chapter 168. Morning 11:20. After breakfast, when the mother and daughter came to the tea house, Chen-shi was already playing Go with Gu Lao, and the brothers were also piling up blocks in the children's playground. As soon as Qin Ruoying put down the little fellow, she ran over and greeted the brothers with a smile. It had only been a day since they last saw each other, but the three little things were like long-lost old friends. After happily greeting the little fellow, the brother immediately shouted for her to come in. They were studying how to make a transformer with blocks. Seeing this, the little fellow immediately took off her shoes, plopped down on the mat, and then crawled to the brothers on all fours. Because of yesterday's experience, the little fellow was very proud today. After sitting for a while, she asked the brothers to guess where she went to play yesterday. The brothers' situation was similar to hers before. Their parents were not around all year round, so they rarely went out to play. Hearing the little fellow showing off her experience yesterday, the two brothers immediately opened their small mouths, and their faces were full of envy. "It's much bigger than here. Dinosaurs, sand, mazes, seesaws, and so many children. There's everything. I'll take you to play next time." In the end, the little fellow did not forget to pat her chest and promise that she would definitely call the brothers together in the future, which immediately attracted the two brothers' agreement. She was showing off unscrupulously, but Qin Ruoying shook his head. As long as a child has something fun and novel, they can't help but show it off. This is human nature. Nian didn't have many toys before, so she was very envious of the brothers' toys. When she has toys that others don't have, she will naturally take them out to win the envy and recognition of others. At this time, toys have lost the meaning of toys, but become a tool for comparison, showing off and not admitting defeat. Therefore, parents often see children arguing over toys, comparing whose toys are more fun and who has more toys. Everyone wants to be excellent. A healthy competitive spirit can promote a child's comprehensive and healthy development and make the child better. However, the competitive spirit can't be too strong or have no direction. If it goes in the wrong direction, it will be counterproductive. If the parents didn't guide them in the right way, the competitive spirit could very well turn into vanity. Vanity was a character flaw caused by excessive pursuit of vanity. It was also a distorted self-esteem. Even adults could not escape the clutches of vanity, let alone children. Qin Ruoying sat at the bar and was thinking about how to set up good values for the little fellow when the door of the tea house was suddenly pushed open. It was a mother and her daughter. The woman was in her early 30s, and she was dressed very gracefully and luxuriously. However, the most eye-catching thing was the little girl beside her. The little girl looked only 1 or 2 years older than Nian. At such a young age, he was wearing a Dior fur coat that was priced at tens of thousands, and he was carrying a Balenciaga bag in his hand. Just this outfit alone would cost at least 100,000 yuan. Children grew up quickly. Many of the clothes bought this year could not be worn next year. Therefore, by the time this winter was over and the next winter came, the 100,000 yuan would probably be gone. She was really rich and capricious. The woman stood at the door and looked at the layout of the tea house. After finding that only Chen Shi and Gu Lao were here, she walked into the tea house with her daughter. Because Chen Shi and Gu Lao sat on the right side of the door, the woman sat directly on the left side. She was a guest. Chen Shi and Gu Lao were playing chess, so Qin Ruoying came out from behind the bar and went directly to the woman and asked, "Hello? Do you need something to drink?" The woman took off her coat and motioned the child to sit inside. After hearing Qin Ruoying's words, she picked up the price list on the table and looked at it. Wui de Hong Pao. The woman looked at the price list and suddenly couldn't help but mutter, but her tone was somewhat like ridicule. Although her voice was low, Qin Ruoying, who was standing next to her, heard every word. Qin Ruoying did not respond and pretended not to hear. The woman thought for a moment. After putting the price list back on the table, she said with a little helplessness, "Bilyuakun." "Okay, please wait a moment." Qin Ruoying turned around to make tea for her. At this time, the little girl that the woman brought with her noticed the children's playground in the corner. When she saw the 3 little guys inside, she immediately raised her head and said to the woman with some excitement, "Mommy, can I go and play?" After saying that, the girl pointed to the children's playground. The woman had already heard the movement over there. After thinking for a moment, she said to the girl, "Good girl, don't go. You don't even know them. What if they bully you?" Hearing this, the little girl immediately pouted. It seemed that she was unhappy. Seeing this, the woman quickly hugged the child into her arms and comforted her. "We'll go home in a while. Mommy will play with you, okay?" "No." The little girl shook her head and immediately turned her head to the window, showing a posture that said she didn't want to talk to her. The woman had no choice but to turn her head and look at the children's playground again before saying to the girl, "Then you go and play." "Okay." Hearing that her mother agreed, the little girl immediately climbed over her lap happily, and then ran to the children's playground. The woman still wanted to say something, but seeing her daughter's excited look, she could only let her go. At this time, Qin Ruoying came over with a teacup and a kettle. After she put down the teacup and the kettle, the woman said to Qin Ruoying, "The child wants to play with them. Is it okay?" "It's okay. The more people there are, the more lively it will be," Qin Ruoying replied with a smile. She then turned around and returned to the bar counter. The woman seemed to be a little worried. After thinking for a moment, she picked up her coat and sat in the booth closest to the children's playground with a teacup. The little girl came to the fence and glanced at the 3 little guys who were lying on the ground stacking blocks. Then she asked a little nervously, "Can I play with you?" Hearing this, Nian immediately raised her head and grinned. "Okay, but you have to take off your shoes before you can come in." "Okay." After getting Nian's approval, the little girl immediately took off her shoes and walked in. But after she came in, she found that she couldn't find a seat. The three little guys each sat in a direction with the building block castle as the center. The two brothers were lying on the ground with their buttocks raised high, so they took up a lot of space, making it impossible for her to squeeze in. Seeing this, the little guy immediately patted the two brothers, indicating that they should make room for her. "You guys make way. There's no space." The two brothers were thinking about how to arrange the castle's gate. Hearing the little guy's words, they finally came back to their senses and quickly squeezed out a seat for the little girl. After the little girl sat down, the little guy, as the host, immediately took out a pile of building blocks and placed them in front of her. "My name is Chen Nian. You can call me Nian Nian." Chapter 169. Nian Nian Tian Tian Wen Wen Ming Ming. The four little ones squeezed in the children's playground. With more people, it suddenly became very lively. There were only enough Lego blocks to build two castles. Originally, the two brothers would have one set and Nian Nian would have one set. After Tian Tian came, the little one gave her half, but this made it impossible for her to build a complete castle. Tian Tian seemed to have never played with Lego blocks before. She was so clumsy that she could not even build a house. When the little one saw this, she immediately went to her side and stretched out her hand to command, "You should put this here. Put this here. Here. And here." Under the little one's command, a small castle finally slowly appeared in front of Tian Tian. In order to make Tian Tian happy, the little one even dismantled her half-built castle and gave all the Lego blocks to her. While the little one was instructing Tian Tian to build the castle, the two brothers opposite were busy with their transformers. The Lego blocks were assembled with blueprints. Although the brothers did not understand the blueprints, this did not hinder their work. After being busy for a while, a transformer with clumsy hands and feet finally appeared in front of them. "Sister, look. Optimus Prime." The older brother patted the little one proudly. When the little one saw this, she immediately lay on the ground and carefully observed the transformer. However, at this time the younger brother corrected her. "Sister, this is Megatron." "It's Optimus Prime." "It's Megatron." "Optimus Prime." "I made it." "It's Optimus Prime." "Megatron." "I taught you to make it." "This is Megatron." The two brothers almost fought over the naming rights of the transformers. When the little one saw this, she immediately shouted, "Stop arguing. This is a gorilla." She had never seen a transformer before, so she did not know what Optimus Prime and Decepticon were. The big guy in front of her looked no different from the gorillas she saw in the zoo before, so she decided to name this model. "Gorilla is better than Megatron. Better than Optimus Prime." It was impossible for the twins not to bicker. The little fellow was too lazy to pay attention to them. Instead, she climbed to the gorilla's side and began to use her imagination. She picked up the building blocks and kept adding things to the gorilla. Seeing this, the two brothers were also unwilling to fall behind. They picked up the building blocks one after another and covered it with them. The three little fellows went back and forth, and in just a short while, they formed a completely indescribable monster. Looking at their masterpiece, the three of them couldn't help but laugh out loud. Tian Tian glanced at them, then lowered her head to look at the castle in front of her. Then, for some reason, she suddenly reached out and pushed down the castle that she had painstakingly built. Because the castle made of Lego bricks was not so easily damaged, she used both hands and tore the castle into pieces in a short while. The three little fellows were stunned. After she tore down the castle, the little fellow seemed to have returned to her senses. She asked curiously, "You don't like castles?" "I don't." After saying that, Tian Tian threw the building blocks in her hand, directly hitting the two brothers' mutant gorillas. The building blocks hit the gorilla, and then bounced onto the mat. The little fellow looked down at the building blocks that she threw out. After pondering for a while, she sat up and said to the two brothers, "Let's play marbles?" The two brothers had no objections, so they immediately nodded and said, "Okay." Because they often came here to play, they put all the marbles here. After hearing the little fellow's words, the two brothers eagerly found a box of marbles in the corner. At this time, the little fellow looked at Tian Tian and asked, "Do you know how to play marbles?" Tian Tian shook her head. Seeing this, the little fellow introduced the rules of the game to her. After many days of research, the rules of the marbles game had been comprehensively upgraded. Using the building blocks, the three little fellows invented a game similar to billiards. First, they used the building blocks to circle an area as a field. Then each person put 3 marbles in the field. In front of them would be a goal made of building blocks. As long as they used the mother bullet to knock the opponent's marble into the goal, even if they scored 1 point, they could still win the marble. Whoever lost all their marbles first would lose the game. Tian had never seen this kind of game, so she was immediately attracted to it. There was a standard posture for playing marbles. Using the index finger to circle the marbles and the thumb to push outward, the marbles would fly fast and accurately. After teaching Tian the posture, the 4 people began the game of marbles. Ever since the little fellow learned how to play marbles, she had always been the biggest winner. It was not that her skills were superior, but because the 2 brothers would always argue first and use all their skills to defeat each other, so the little fellow always got a big advantage. Now the 2 brothers were arguing again. The older brother took the lead and directly hit the younger brother's marbles to the side of the goal, almost hitting the target. Seeing this, the little fellow decisively chose to hit the younger brother's marbles directly into the goal, and she was the first to get a point. It was Tian's turn. She looked left and right and chose the marbles that looked easier to hit the older brother. After looking for a while, Tian hit the marbles in her hand. Unfortunately, her skills were too poor, so the marbles that looked easy to hit missed because she missed the opportunity. The older brother escaped and immediately counterattacked with a laugh, immediately hitting Tian's marbles. Although he did not hit the target, he hit Tian's marbles to the side of the goal. The younger brother was also a veteran, so he naturally would not miss such a good opportunity, so he decisively chose to put down the grudge between him and his older brother, and turned to attack Tian. Tian's marbles were successfully pocketed by him. Seeing that she had inexplicably lost a marbles, Tian immediately pouted. Unfortunately, her skills were too poor, and she always missed when she wanted to counterattack. The game continued. In a short while the little fellow each got a marbles from the 2 brothers, and the 2 brothers each got a marbles from Tian. On the field, Nian still had 3 marbles, the brothers had 2 each, and the unlucky Tian only had 1 left. Seeing that Tian seemed to be a little unhappy, the little fellow put one of her marbles in front of her and said to her, "You just played, this is for you." Hearing this, Tian frowned and immediately returned the marbles to the little fellow, then pouted and said, "I don't want it, I want to win it back myself." After saying that, she picked up the marbles and seriously aimed at them. Looking at her, it seemed that she wanted to rely on her own strength to win back the marbles. Seeing that she did not want it, the little fellow did not care about her anymore. She lay on the ground and began to compete with the 2 brothers again. Tian was a newbie, so the 2 brothers did not hit her last marbles again, but fought with each other. However, when the little fellow hit another marbles, the older brother could not help but panic. Because he only had 1 marbles left. The older brother looked at the field and found that Tian's marbles were the easiest to hit, so he directly aimed at Tian's marbles. After all, he was about to be eliminated, so he naturally did not want to be modest to the newbie. Ping! The marbles collided with each other, making a crisp sound. Immediately after that, Tian's last marbles were hit into the goal. "I hit it. Mine. This one is mine." The older brother sat up excitedly. However, just as he was about to reach out to pick up the marbles in front of Tian suddenly burst into tears. This sudden turn of events shocked the 3 little fellows. And Chapter 170. Tian's sudden cry shocked everyone. Just like the weather in June, one second the sun was shining brightly, and the next second a thunderstorm was brewing. It was really unpredictable and impossible to figure out. The older brother was also shocked. He quickly put the marble back in front of Tian and comforted her. "Don't cry. I'll return the marble to you." However, Tian did not care at all. She continued to cry her heart out. The moment the woman heard her cry, she stood up from the card seat in a panic. She quickly walked over to the railing and saw Tian Tian crying miserably on the cushion. Her expression changed and she rushed to Tian Tian's side. Darling, what's wrong? Did they bully you? Don't cry. Tell Mommy. Mommy will help you. The woman pulled Tian Tian into her arms and comforted her softly. When the older brother saw this, he immediately defended himself. We didn't bully her. The younger brother also echoed. We were playing a marble game just now. We didn't bully her. She was the one who cried all of a sudden. Although the brothers often bickered with each other, they were not careless at all when they needed to work together to deal with outsiders. Tian Tian was crying miserably. When she saw the woman coming over, she immediately threw herself into her arms. The woman comforted her for a while. When she saw that Tian Tian could not stop crying, she glared at the brothers fiercely. At this moment, the little boy could not stand it anymore. He quickly explained, Auntie, we didn't bully Tian Tian. We were playing a game. She was so angry that she cried when she lost. The woman's attitude made the brothers feel very wronged. After hearing Nian Nian's words, the older brother immediately pouted and muttered, That's right. She couldn't afford to lose. The younger brother felt that this matter had nothing to do with him, so he immediately made a face at Tian Tian and laughed. That's right. Tian Tian couldn't afford to lose. Shame, shame, shame. The younger brother's actions were not malicious. On the contrary, he had good intentions. This was because when they played games in the past, if one of them could not afford to lose and cried, everyone would use this method to stop him from crying and provoke the other party's competitive spirit. This was a common method of provocation between children. However, in the woman's eyes, this was a malicious provocation, so she immediately exploded. Whose child are you? Don't you have any manners? Didn't your parents teach you how to get along with other children? The woman pointed at the two brothers and scolded them. The elder brother was frightened. He sat on the cushion and didn't even dare to raise his head. But his younger brother was not happy. He straightened his neck and shouted at the woman, We didn't bully her. It was she who couldn't afford to lose. Can't afford to lose. The younger brother's expression was also extremely aggrieved. At this moment, he was like little Hachi who would rather die than submit, vowing to fight the evil forces to the end. If he didn't, then he didn't. His honest brother would never take the blame for this kind of thing. This time, the woman was really infuriated by him. Because she was squatting in front of the two brothers, when she heard her brother's words, she immediately raised her right hand and slapped her brother's face. Her brother had never thought that this woman would hit him. But fortunately, this slap was stopped by Qin Ruoying in time. Qin Ruoying had just come over, but she stood aside and didn't say anything. Seeing that the woman was about to hit her brother, she naturally couldn't sit back and do nothing. They're still children. It's normal for children to have a little friction. As a parent, directly intervening will only cause a bigger conflict. After stopping the woman's slap, Qin Ruoying frowned and added, That's not good. It was inevitable that there would be friction between children. Which child hadn't fought when they were young? So when a parent faced this problem, it was best to follow the three no's principle. Don't be angry, don't intervene, and don't be afraid of being taken advantage of. This seemingly negative attitude was the most basic, simplest, and most effective way to cultivate healthy relationships between children. Children would be angry, but they would never hold a grudge. If a parent immediately intervened when a child had a little friction, this behavior was destructive in itself. It seemed like meticulous care, but in fact it would deprive the child of the experience of real life, resulting in the child's lack of experience of setbacks. It would make their ability to resist pressure extremely poor, and their psychological endurance would also weaken. Just because Tian Tian cried, the woman directly judged that the two brothers had bullied Tian Tian. This simple and crude way of thinking would not help a child's growth at all. Instead, it would harm her. In name, it was love, but in fact it was harm. When the two brothers saw Qin Ruoying coming, it was as if they had found a backer. The older brother immediately pursed his little mouth and cried as well. Tian Tian would cry, and so would he. However, the younger brother still had the spirit of a man. He stared back at the angry woman without fear. We didn't bully Tian Tian. The younger brother kept muttering this sentence. This was the source of his courage. Grandpa always said that people should walk and stand upright. If they didn't bully Tian Tian, then they didn't. At this time, the little girl also stood up. She tugged at the corner of Qin Ruoying's clothes across the fence, then pouted and muttered, "Mama, we really didn't bully Tian Tian. Good girl." Qin Ruoying rubbed the little girl's head, then said to the two brothers, "You two apologize to Tian Tian." She didn't know what had happened, but looking at Tian Tian's aggrieved appearance, she guessed that a child wouldn't cry for no reason. So, it was obvious that these three little guys had made her cry for some reason. In this case, an apology was necessary. When the little girl heard her mother say so, she thought for a moment and said directly, "Tian Tian, I'm sorry. Don't cry." Then the older brother also stopped crying under the comfort of Qin Ruoying. Then he said with a little grievance, "I'm sorry." It was the younger brother's turn. When Qin Ruoying motioned for the younger brother to apologize to Tian Tian, the younger brother fell silent. He sat on the cushion, lowered his head, and no one knew what he was thinking. Qin Ruoying gently touched his head, motioning for him to calm down. But at this time, the younger brother suddenly seemed to be provoked by something. He stood up and shouted, "We didn't bully her. Why should we apologize? I didn't do anything wrong. I won't apologize. I won't apologize." With that, the younger brother suddenly stood up from the cushion and rushed out of the children's park. Qin Ruoying wanted to stop him, but she didn't dare to use too much force, so he broke free at once. As he ran, the younger brother suddenly burst into tears. Because he really felt wronged, tears blurred his eyes, but the younger brother still found the right direction by feeling. He wanted to rush out of the tea house barefooted. At this time, a figure suddenly appeared at the door of the tea house, blocking the younger brother's way. Then the younger brother felt his body suddenly light, as if he was flying. The younger brother quickly wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, only to find that it was Chun-Shi who had picked him up. "Let go of me." The younger brother shook left and right hard, wanting Chun-Shi to put him down. Looking at the stubborn little thing in front of him, Chun-Shi couldn't help laughing. Reaching out and pinching the younger brother's angry and aggrieved face, Chun-Shi carried him back to the children's park. Chapter 171. Gu Lao was sitting in the booth with a smile. Although his grandson was so angry that he cried, he was not in a hurry at all. He seemed to want to see how Chun-Shi would deal with this matter. The younger brother usually looked silly, but if he was really forced, this child's character would be very strong. The older brother was much more tactful than the younger brother, or rather, he was more clever. So even if he felt wronged, he would choose to compromise in order to keep the peace. Although they were twins, they had completely different personalities. The younger brother's character was easy to be taken advantage of, but he was very likable. Others didn't know, but Chun-Shi liked him very much. An honest young man was very much to his taste. Qin Ruoying didn't know what had happened just now, so she asked the three little guys to apologize to Tian Tian. Chun-Shi was sitting far away and was still playing chess with Gu Lao. But with his 5 senses, how could he not know what was going on between these little fellows? It was all because of that woman's pampering that she raised a spoiled little princess. She had been surrounded by the whole world since she was a child. She would lose her temper if she was slightly neglected, not to mention that the two brothers had won 3 marbles from her. Although she was a newbie, she didn't have the awareness of a newbie. It was good to be competitive, but it was bad to have no self-awareness. She cried at the slightest thing and lost her temper at the slightest dissatisfaction. Even Nian Nian was not as delicate as her. Of course, Tian Tian couldn't be blamed for this. She could only blame her mother, who always held her in the palm of her hand. It was just a small matter, but she, as a parent, had to get involved. Suddenly, the nature of the whole thing changed. The younger brother was very reluctant to go. When he saw Chun-Shi carrying him to the children's playground, he immediately became excited. "Let go of me. I want to go down. I want Grandpa." The younger brother struggled to twist his body, but Chun-Shi didn't pay attention to him at all. After carrying him to Qin Ruoying, he put him back on the cushion. The younger brother glanced at Tian Tian and her mother, and wanted to run away. But at this time, Chunshi grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back to the children's playground. After blocking the entrance of the children's amusement park and not letting his brother out, Chunshi asked Tian Tian, who was hiding in the woman's arms, Tian Tian, did they bully you? Tian Tian had already stopped crying. Her teary eyes really looked like she had suffered a great grievance. After hearing Chunshi's words, Tian Tian didn't answer. Instead, she turned around and leaned into the woman's arms. Tian Tian, answer me. Did they bully you? Chunshi asked again. However, Tian Tian still didn't say anything. Instead, she leaned on the woman's shoulder and didn't even turn her head. The woman felt her body tremble slightly and thought that she was frightened, so she immediately frowned and said to Chunshi, "What are you doing? Can't you see that the child is still crying?" Chunshi ignored the ignorant woman and continued to ask, Tian Tian, if they bullied you just now, just nod and I will beat their butts now. Okay. Hearing this, the woman's expression softened. She felt that Chunshi's attitude was very good, so she said to Tian Tian, Tian Tian, tell mommy, did they bully you? Don't be afraid, mommy will protect you. Tian Tian still didn't answer. But at this time, the little girl couldn't stand it anymore. She stood up from the climbing mat, pointed at Tian Tian, and said loudly, Papa, we didn't bully her. No. Now not only did her brother feel wronged, but even the little girl felt a little wronged. Like her brother, she didn't understand why the adults didn't believe them. With Qin Ruoying's understanding of Chunshi, she understood something after thinking for a while. She knew that Chunshi must have a deep meaning, so she quickly hugged the little girl across the fence and whispered to her, Nian Nian, don't worry, listen to what Daddy has to say. The little girl was angry and pouted unhappily. Chunshi didn't know why, but he kept asking Tian Tian, Tian Tian, did they bully you? There seemed to be a magic in his voice. After repeating this over and over again, Tian Tian finally couldn't hold it in any longer and burst into tears again. Then she cried and sobbed in a low voice, they didn't bully me. Louder, I didn't hear you clearly. Chunshi's voice was a little harsh. At this moment, Tian Tian finally raised her head to look at him, and then cried out with a sobbing tone, no, they didn't bully me. Hearing this answer, Chunshi couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. It was good that she could answer honestly, which meant that the child could still be saved. However, after hearing Tian Tian's sobbing voice, the woman couldn't take it anymore. Thus, she immediately stood up from the ground and pointed at Chunshi angrily. You have to threaten such a young child, are you still human? The child was clearly suffering a great grievance. The man in front of her seemed to be seeking justice for Tian Tian, but in fact he was threatening the child. There were only the mother and daughter here, and under his repeated questioning, the child was clearly frightened, so she didn't dare to say that she was bullied. The woman was very angry. However, Chunshi was amused by her strange logic. I threatened her? Didn't you hear what she said? If you didn't threaten her, would she say that? No wonder your child bullied others as parents, you're not human. At this moment, Chunshi felt like 10,000 alpacas were running through him. The child could still be saved, but as a mother, she couldn't be saved. At this time, Qin Ruoying seemed to want to say something, but Chunshi stopped her in time. He was not a saint, and he had his own temper. The woman in front of him had broken through the limit, and was purely pestering him. Since she was being unreasonable, Chunshi naturally wouldn't be polite to her. Get lost, you're not welcome here. Hearing this, the woman couldn't help but be stunned. Then she laughed angrily, pointed at Chunshi and shouted, You told me to get lost? Good, very good, very good. Because she was so angry, the woman's face was flushed red, and her body was trembling slightly. After looking at Chunshi deeply, she casually wiped the tears on Tian Tian's face. Then she picked up Tian Tian and walked out of the children's playground angrily. Hey, Tian Tian's shoes are here. Chunshi pointed at Tian Tian's shoes kindly. However, to the woman, it sounded like mockery. So the woman finally couldn't help but say fiercely, Just you wait. After saying that, she rushed out of the tea house with Tian Tian without even taking her shoes. After seeing Tian Tian and her mother leave, the unhappiness on the little girl's face turned into anxiety. After hesitating for a moment, she walked to Chunxi's side, tugged at Chunxi's clothes and said timidly, "Papa, I'm sorry." When the younger brother saw this, he immediately came to Chunxi's side and said in a low voice, "Uncle, I'm sorry." The older brother was a little confused, but he immediately stood up from the ground and said, "Uncle, I'm sorry." The couple couldn't help but look at each other and laugh. Chunxi reached out to touch the heads of the three little girls and said to them solemnly, "You didn't do anything wrong. But you have to remember in the future, don't be like Tian Tian, who doesn't dare to admit her mistakes because she will not only harm herself, but also others. Do you understand?" "Yes." Chapter 172. A child's joy, anger, sorrow, and joy were all real. A momentary outburst of emotion came and went quickly. After the three little guys saw that Chunxi was not angry, they immediately sat down in the children's playground and started playing again. As for Tian Tian, obviously, they had forgotten about her. The couple looked at each other and had a more intuitive feeling about the importance of educating children. It was called love, but it was actually harm. The little guy's experience was somewhat similar to the brothers. They lacked the love of their parents since they were young, and Aunt Zhang and Gu Lao were quite strict. They never let the children mess around, so they developed an obedient and sensible personality. Tian Tian's parents spoiled her too much, so she would immediately turn hostile and throw tantrums when she was unhappy. After all, she was not a prostitute, so society would teach her a truth sooner or later. She was not the sun, so no one would revolve around her forever. The annoying guy left, and the tea house was quiet again. Chunxi was about to go back to play chess with Gu Lao, but at this moment his phone suddenly rang. The caller was Qin Xueqing. He passed the screen in front of Qin Ruoying so that she could take a look. Then he answered the call. "Hello, Qin. It's me." After hearing Chunxi's voice, Qin Xueqing's voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Chunxi thought she had something to say, so he did not speak. But after waiting for a while, there was no sound from the other end of the phone. So, Chunxi had to frown and ask, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" "Nothing, I just want to tell you that I have a new task recently, so I won't be back for the time being." "Oh, okay," Chunxi nodded. Just as she was about to say something, the phone rang with a beep-beep sound from the other end of the line. Qin Xueqing hung up the phone. Chunxi felt that she was a bit inexplicable. After putting away the phone, he turned to Qin Ruoying and said, "Qin said that she's very busy recently, so she won't be back for the time being." And that's all." "Ah, that's really her character." Seeing Chunxi's helpless look, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile. Meanwhile, after Qin Xueqing hung up the phone, she looked down at the satellite photos in her hand. This was a sub-meter-level high-resolution satellite image, and the first photo was of the Meimen ruins. At this moment, Meimen was like a giant crater that had been smashed by a meteorite. Everything around it had been reduced to nothingness. The explosion was comparable to a magnitude 4 earthquake. The moment the explosion occurred, it had already shocked the entire world. Chunxi would automatically shield his whereabouts when he was flying, so there was no way for the satellite to capture his figure. But that didn't stop them from investigating. Thanks to Chunxi, Qin Xueqing was now famous. As long as it was a member of the Martial Arts Alliance, there was almost no one who did not recognize this beautiful woman with a broken arm. She was Xian Nu, and Xian Nu's wish was to become a Wu Dao Grandmaster. Therefore, under the careful cultivation of the village, Qin Xueqing's martial arts cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds. 2 years ago, she had already reached the peak of transforming strength, but because she had been unable to break through, Qin Xueqing chose to join the Wu Lian, trying to find a breakthrough through actual combat and step into the gang realm in one fell swoop. The young and beautiful transforming strength grandmaster attracted a lot of attention at that time. Everyone knew that Director Qin, who was parachuted into the emergency department, had a strong background. But it wasn't until she had a broken hand that everyone finally realized how strong her background was. She was a celestial being. Qin Xueqing had failed the hunting mission and lost a hand because of it. At that time, many people were waiting to see her make a fool of herself. But they didn't expect that she had found a great master from somewhere, who took her all the way to the Golden Triangle. After rescuing the hostages, they also flattened the place. Because of that, when Qin Xueqing returned to Beijing to report on her work, no matter who saw her, they would respectfully greet her, Director Qin. They couldn't afford to offend her. Qin Xueqing's status in the Wu Lian rose sharply. At that time, she learned a not-so-secret. The village was also flattened. To be honest, Qin Xueqing didn't have such a big reaction, even when Chen Shi killed great-uncle in front of her. But after hearing the news from the leader, Qin Xueqing was so shocked that she didn't come to her senses for a long time. After all, the village was almost a holy place in her mind. This holy place of inheritance that had existed for countless years was completely turned into ruins because of Chen Shi's appearance. The village used to have a well-known name, All Saints Valley. There had long been a rumor that there were many inheritances in Huaxia, and the All Saints Valley occupied 3 of them. In the battle between the Immortal generals, the village was affected by the power of the 2 and completely turned into ruins. Before Chen Shi left, he killed the few remaining elders in the village. The village was destroyed, and the elders were also dead. Without a leader, the Wu Lian extended an olive branch to the villagers, so most of the villagers chose to join the Wu Lian with their inheritances. The Wu Lian also became the biggest beneficiary. If a butterfly flapped its wings in Brazil, would it cause a tornado in Texas? This seemingly absurd question was the famous butterfly effect theory. At this moment, Chen Shi was like the butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil. He didn't know what kind of storm his big move would set off in the world. Of course, even if he knew, he wouldn't care. The small tea house by Hohai Lake was still open for business. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Gu Lao was ready to take the brothers home after this game. But at this moment, 2GL8S blocked the entrance of the tea house. Then a group of people got out of the car. When Chen Shi heard the movement outside, he turned his head and couldn't help but sigh. He said helplessly, "It hasn't even been a month since it opened, and my tea house is already being smashed twice." Gu Lao also turned his head and looked outside the window. He frowned and said, "Should we call the police?" "It's fine, take a seat. I'll go out and take a look." After that, Chen Shi walked out of the booth with a smile. Chen Shi walked to the door, and was about to push the door open when he suddenly thought of something. He quickly turned around and shouted at Qin Ruoying, "Ying, call the police." Qin Ruoying couldn't help but roll her eyes. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She replied, "Be quiet, don't scare the kid again." Last time, Wang Hao's group smashed the window and scared the little girl. If they did it again, she would probably be traumatized. The 2GL8S blocked the entrance of the tea house. This time was a little different from last time. Last time, Wang Hao's group came for Qiao Yuan, but this time, they came for Chen Shi. Therefore, as soon as Chen Shi walked out of the tea house, Tiantian's mother saw him. Chapter 173. Outside the tea house, a group of people got out of the car. Tiantian's mother was obviously the leader of the group, and next to her stood a man in his 40s. Tiantian's mother was called Li Lu, and she used to be a small-time actress. After marrying into a rich family, she stopped acting and became a rich lady at home. She basically only had to take care of her child every day. When Li Lu saw Chen Shi walk out, she immediately became excited. "Honey, it's him." Her husband's name was Zhou Haisheng, and he was the boss of a real estate company in Jizhou. There were 7 or 8 people standing behind Zhou Haisheng, and they were all Zhou Haisheng's subordinates. They were all older, and the youngest of them was at least 30 years old. Including Zhou Haisheng, they were all dressed in a very mature manner, and most of them were dressed in dark business suits. Just by standing there, he naturally gave people a sense of stability. In addition to their mature temperament, there was also a faint aura of power around them. Aura was a very mysterious thing. If Wang Hao was standing in front of this group of people, he would be so scared that he wouldn't dare to look them in the eye. This group of people was now a proper company employee, but who didn't have a past. Zhou Haisheng was from Zhonghai. When he was young, he relied on his courage to fight to become a mine manager in a mine in Inner Mongolia. Later, when there was a boom in contracting coal mines, Zhou Haixing used some means to contract a medium-sized coal mine in Jizhou, and thus earned a large amount of startup capital. Zhou Haixing was the type of person who had foresight. He knew that the mining and energy business wouldn't last long, so he transitioned into the real estate industry a long time ago. Mining, energy, and real estate were the two most profitable industries in China. Those who could carve out a bloody path in these industries were all trendsetters of the times. Zhou Haixing was indeed very powerful, but unfortunately, he wasn't a rich second generation. This also caused his scope to be limited. Even if he became a real estate mogul with status and identity in Jizhou, Zhou Haixing was still limited to Jizhou and couldn't continue to expand. He started from scratch and got to where he was now. He was already someone that many people looked up to. However, Zhou Haixing wasn't satisfied and always wanted to go further. The appearance of Xiong, a new district, gave Zhou Haixing hope, so in the past year he would go to Shangjing whenever he had nothing to do. However, the waters in Shangjing were too deep. In Jizhou he was a big shot who could cover the sky with one hand, but in Shangjing, it was difficult for him to move forward. It took Zhou Haixing more than half a year before he finally found a high-end route. However, even though the connection was made, there was no progress in the matter. In Zhou Haixing's words, those people were bastards who only took money but didn't do anything. Moreover, he couldn't afford to offend them. During this period of time, Zhou Haixing had been acting like a grandson to curry favor with others all day long, so he had been suppressing a stomach full of resentment. When he suddenly heard that his wife and child were being bullied, how could he sit still? So after receiving the call, he immediately rushed over with his men. Before coming to the tea house, Li Lu had already told Zhou Haixing the whole story with exaggerated details. At that time, Zhou Haixing had exploded with anger. It was true that the waters in Shangjing were deep, but it wasn't to the extent that any Tom, Dick, and Harry could jump in front of him. If a tiger didn't show its might, would they really think that it was a sick cat? Therefore, when he heard that Li Lu had identified the young man in front of him as the culprit who bullied her and her mother, Zhou Haixing immediately frowned. He looked at Chenxi from head to toe, then glanced at the small tea house. Although Sijio City was big, one of the families by the sea might be related to a big shot. After all, Zhou Haixing was a fierce dragon crossing the river, so he was very cautious in his actions. Therefore, after pondering for a while, he turned around and pulled Li Lu into the GL8. Li Lu was pushed into the car by Zhou Haixing in a daze. When she came back to her senses, she struggled to get down. "What are you doing? I was bullied. Aren't you going to stand up for me? Shut up. Sit here and don't move." Zhou Haixing was already in a bad mood. When he saw that this woman was being so insensible, he was instantly furious. He pushed Li Lu back to her seat, then turned around and said to the people outside the car, "Just a simple lesson, a small punishment, a big warning." After saying that, he pulled the car door shut. This group of people had been with him since the days of the mine. They were able to survive from that era, so naturally, they were the number one figures who had been through a lot. What Zhou Haixing meant by a simple lesson was actually not to cripple them. After all, this was Shangjing. It would be fine if they stayed in the hospital for a month or so. These people were different from Wang Hao and the group of young people who only knew how to make a fuss. After hearing Zhou Haixing's words, a trace of ferocity flashed across their eyes. Without any pleasantries, the man standing closest to them directly rushed toward Chenxi. He wanted to grab Chenxi, but he did not expect that Chenxi would grab his wrist first. Chenxi glanced at him and then twisted his wrist. The man immediately let out a scream. His left hand was dislocated by Chenxi just like that. To be honest, compared to using violence, Chenxi preferred to reason with people. Unfortunately, they did not like to reason. However, since they chose to fight, Chenxi did not hold back. When the man next to him saw that his brother was at a disadvantage, he immediately took out a switchblade from his waist. However, before the switchblade in his hand could stab over, Chenxi had already slapped him in the face. He immediately fell to the ground and lay motionless on the ground. No one knew if he was dead or alive. "He's a martial artist. He's a martial artist." The remaining few people were scared out of their wits. They watched as Chun-Shi walked straight to the GL8, as if he was going to look for Zhou Haixing. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, they still rushed up like a swarm of bees. Just like Yao Ming in kindergarten, he could casually slap a group of children. Chun-Shi also felt that it was pointless. After one slap, the remaining few people fell to the ground and cried out in pain. This time, he used his true essence, so these people did not even know how they fell. Zhou Haixing was still talking to Li Lu in the car. Suddenly, someone knocked on the car window. He turned his head and saw the young man smiling at him through the car window. Zhou Haixing instinctively wanted to lock the car door. However, at this time the car door was directly pulled open by Chun-Shi. Then, a strong force came and immediately pulled Zhou Haixing out of the car, and threw him directly to the ground. This unforeseen event came too suddenly. It was not until Zhou Haixing lay on the cold ground and looked at his men on the ground that he suddenly realized. He had kicked an iron plate. Chun-Shi ignored Li Lu, who was screaming in the car. After throwing Zhou Haixing to the ground, he stood directly next to Zhou Haixing and looked down at him condescendingly. However, just as Chun-Shi was about to talk to this pair of naughty parents about how to raise their children, he suddenly noticed that someone had secretly approached the tea house. It was not an ordinary person who happened to be passing by, but a martial arts expert who was good at holding his breath. Chapter 174. The people Zhou Haixing brought were sprawled all over the ground. Even he himself was thrown to the ground by Chun-Shi. It took him a long time to regain his senses. From the time he got into the car to when Chun-Shi pulled him down, the time it took was less than 30 seconds. In less than 30 seconds, Zhou Haixing already experienced the feeling of being on a roller coaster. Could this be fate? Was it destined that everything would go wrong in Shangjing? His wife was bullied when she casually entered a tea house, and when he brought people back to get back at them, he found out that the other party was a martial arts expert that he could not afford to provoke. Zhou Haixing really had 800 lifetimes worth of bad luck. For ordinary people, the martial Dao was not an unattainable existence. After all, everything in this world depended on talent. Music, painting, singing, dancing, and all kinds of sports. Even playing games required talent. Some people could play for 3 months and reach the diamond rank, while others could only hover around the gold rank after playing for a few years. Zhou Haixing once wanted to practice martial arts, but he was not cut out for it, so he stopped after a year or two. It was because he had learned martial arts that he knew how powerful martial arts experts were. This was not Jizhou, this was Shangjing. No matter how powerful he was in Jizhou, he had to lower his head in Shangjing. Zhou Haixing lay on the ground, not daring to move, but his mind was quickly thinking about how to solve this problem. Chun-Shi did not know about Zhou Haixing's psychological changes. He just wanted to have a good chat with this pair of naughty parents. But at this time, Chun-Shi suddenly felt something strange. On the street outside the tea house, a man and a woman suddenly walked over. The two of them were about 30 years old, and were dressed very casually. They looked like a couple who came to Hohai to play. The man was holding a phone and constantly taking pictures. Martial artists did not know how to be invisible like Chun-Shi, so they could only use their breathing, movements, and muscle expressions to disguise themselves as ordinary people. But because of years of training, martial artists' footsteps were usually very light. Moreover, martial arts required martial artists to have precise control of their body, so every step they took, whether it was posture or distance, was almost the same as the previous step. This was muscle memory that could only be formed after a long period of training. It was precisely because of this that even though they had disguised themselves perfectly, they still couldn't escape Chun-Shi's eyes. Another detail was that this man and woman were not a couple at all. Although they looked very intimate, when the two of them looked at each other, their eyes couldn't help but avoid each other's gaze. It was obvious that they were a fake couple who got together at the last minute. Chun-Shi ignored Zhou Haixing. Instead, he stood at the entrance of the tea house and looked at the couple through the gap between the two GL8s. He just stared at the two of them. She watched them stroll from outside the bar to outside the tea house. Although the two of them tried their best to pretend as if nothing had happened and chatted casually, being stared at by Chun-Shi like this made them feel a strong pressure. They couldn't help but feel a little nervous. and because of their nervousness, their movements were slightly stiff. The woman didn't even dare to turn her head to look at the tea house, but this kind of behavior was simply giving herself away. There were so many people lying in front of the tea house. If they were ordinary people, how could they not turn around to take a look? The two of them slowly walked in front of the tea house. But at this moment, Chunshi suddenly waved at the two of them and shouted, "You two, come here for a second." The woman was so scared that she almost jumped up on the spot. Seeing this, the man next to her put his arm around her and pulled her forward. Seeing that they were still acting, Chunshi suddenly lost interest, so he said coldly, "I'll count to 3, 1, 2. Before the third count, the man seemed to have made a decision. He suddenly pulled the woman in front of Chunshi. They pretended not to see the wounded people on the ground. After they came in front of Chunshi, the two of them bowed and said, "Mr. Chun." Seeing that the two of them were no longer acting, Chunshi couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. He asked, "Did the Wu Lian send you?" "Yes, Mr. Chun, we belong to the Wu Lian inspection office. This is my ID." The man didn't dare to look up. As he spoke, he took out an ID from his pocket and respectfully handed it to Chunshi. Chunshi thought for a moment, then asked thoughtfully, "How many days have you been here?" 3 days. Hearing this answer, Chunshi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. After his divine sense was damaged, he could only rely on his 5 senses to detect the movements around him. If it weren't for the fact that the tea house was smashed today, he probably wouldn't have been able to find the two of them. Being watched was always a bad experience, so Chunshi thought for a moment, then frowned and asked, "Why are you watching me?" The man was silent. Seeing this, the woman couldn't help but nervously tug at the corner of his shirt. After the two of them quietly looked at each other, the man gritted his teeth and explained, "In Huaxia, all people above the master stage will be followed and observed by the inspector's office. Please forgive us for any inconvenience caused to you." "Oh, Wu Lian has such a rule? Why, are you afraid that martial arts masters will cause trouble everywhere?" Chunshi asked casually. The man didn't answer Chunshi's question, but lowered his head and repeated, "We're just following orders. Please forgive us for the inconvenience." The two of them obviously knew Chunshi's strength. So even if Chunshi didn't show any malice to them, they still felt a great deal of pressure. These two people were just small fries following orders, so Chunshi didn't intend to make things difficult for them. After understanding the situation, Chunshi said casually, "Okay, I got it. You can go." If he remembered correctly, his sister-in-law seemed to have a certain level in the Wu Lian. It seemed that he would have to call her later to ask. In fact, there was no need to ask at all. He could understand the Wu Lian's intention with just a little thought. Zongnanhai was not far to the south of Hohai. What if Chunshi couldn't figure it out and went to Zongnanhai to have a go? If something really went wrong, no one would be able to bear the responsibility. Therefore, it was imperative to supervise the operation. To be honest, the Wu Lian didn't try to arrest Chunshi, which was actually very polite. After hearing that they could leave, the two of them immediately breathed a sigh of relief. The woman turned to leave. But at this time, the man looked down at Zhou Haixing on the ground and asked, "Mr. Chun, do you need us to deal with it?" Zhou Haixing was not a young man who hadn't seen the world. When he heard the two words Wu Lian just now, he knew who he had provoked today. After listening to their conversation, Zhou Haixing was so scared that he lost all his strength. Wu Lian Inspection Office, masters above the master level. Just a few words were enough to make Zhou Haixing realize the seriousness of the matter. Chapter 175. For the sake of peace and quiet, Chunshi thought for a moment, and then let the two people from the inspector's office take away the unlucky Zhou Haixing. As for where they were taking Zhou Haixing, that was not Chunshi's concern. He only hoped that this setback would give the naughty parents a different understanding of life, so that they could lead Tian, who had almost gone astray, back to the right track. The child was not wrong, it was their parents who were wrong. Nowadays, everyone was equal. Their children were not made of gold, so how could they be more precious than other people's children? So what if they were rich and powerful? Other than Gao Li and Jin Pang Pang, Who else in this world would dare to say that they were the number one rich second generation? Even Nian Nian was not as delicate as Tian Tian. Thinking of this, Chunxi could not help but feel a strong sense of pride from the bottom of his heart. Looking at other people's children, and then looking at his own, it was true that there was no harm without comparison. When Chunxi returned to the tea house, Gu Lao immediately asked with a smile, "Have you practiced martial arts?" The old man had already seen what happened through the glass, so he asked this question. "A little bit, but I'm still considered a beginner." Chunxi replied with a smile, not intending to hide it. Hearing this, Gu Lao pointed at him and laughed as if he was joking. "You are so open-minded." "Don't, you're flattering me. I can't accept this evaluation." The two of them could be considered friends despite the difference in age, so they would often joke around casually. When Chunxi sat back in the booth and finished the unfinished game, Gu Lao was ready to leave with the two brothers. Before leaving, Gu Lao took out another 20 yuan. But under Chunxi's strong opposition, Gu Lao finally took back the 20 yuan. He and Chunxi did not lack the 20 yuan. It was only a cup of tea, so it was a bit strange to do this every day. Okay, let's make it clear in the future. You can't say that this old man is shameless, coming here to drink tea all day. How could that be? You're too polite. After exchanging a few pleasantries with Chunxi, Gu Lao told the two brothers to leave. The three little fellows had already gotten used to this rhythm. Therefore, when the two brothers heard Gu Lao's call, the elder brother pouted and said to the little girl, "Sister, I'll come and play with you tomorrow." The younger brother quickly added, "Me too. Me too." All right. Looking at the two brothers who were about to leave, the little guy nodded heavily, his face full of reluctance. After changing their shoes, the two brothers ran to Gu Lao's side. Before they left, they didn't forget to turn back and wave at the little girl. "Goodbye, little sister. Goodbye." The winter in Shangjing was already cold, and it was still winter, so there were fewer and fewer guests. As soon as the two brothers left, the tea house immediately became deserted without the children's laughter. The little girl played alone in the children's playground for a while, but because she didn't have the company of the two brothers, she pouted and ran out after playing for a while. When Chunxi saw her expression, he knew that she was a little depressed because there was no one to play with her. Therefore, Chunxi picked up the little girl from the ground and threw her directly into the sky. His actions were too sudden, giving the little fellow a big fright. But when the little girl came back to her senses, she started to giggle. "Is it fun? It's fun. It's fun. Okay, then let's do it 2 more times." Qin Ruoying sat behind the bar and watched them play for a while, then asked with a smile, "It looks like there won't be any business. Do you want to close and go home?" Before Chunxi could answer, the little girl who was still flying in the air immediately turned her head and shouted, "Go home. Go home." Chunxi caught the little girl, kissed her on the face and laughed. "Okay, let's go home." The tea house was closed. But before leaving, Chunxi did not forget to set up a simple illusion array around. The trip to the Golden Triangle had completely exposed him. It was estimated that the Wu Lian people would peep at him with binoculars all day long. Although he didn't care, he didn't like to be peeped at. This incident also reminded Chunxi that no matter where he went in the future, he had to hold his breath. Life finally returned to peace. Fame and fortune in life, but after death, they could only turn into a handful of yellow soil. Knowing how to live and learning to enjoy the happiness flowing in the plain life was the true meaning of life. What was happiness? Happiness was when cats eat fish, dogs eat meat, and Ultraman beat up small monsters. It seemed to be a simple and easy truth, but few people could really understand the essence of it. Another 2 days passed. Qin Xueqing still didn't come back. No one knew what she was busy with during this time. On this day, it was a rare sunny day. The bright sun made people unable to look directly at it. Under the reflection of the snow, the sun seemed to be a little brighter, illuminating the world and sweeping away the previous hazy darkness. The surface of Hohai Lake was sparkling. Standing under the sun, one couldn't help but feel a lot more relaxed. The weather was so good that Gu Lao brought the two brothers to the tea house early in the morning. However, he didn't come to play chess today. He had something to ask of Chunxi. Gu Lao went on a long trip today, and would only come back tomorrow. At this time in the past, Gu Lao would either bring the two brothers or send them to their mother. Now that he knew Chen Shi, he naturally didn't have to go through so much trouble. Because the two brothers had to stay with Chen Shi for a night, Gu Lao offered to give Chen Shi 200 yuan for living expenses, but Chen Shi decisively refused. It was okay to foster children, but giving money would be looking down on him. After several rejections, Gu Lao didn't insist anymore. He simply said a few words to the two brothers, and then left in a hurry. Grandpa was going to leave them for a day, but there was no disappointment on the faces of the two brothers. Instead, there was excitement. In this regard, they were completely different from the little guy. Perhaps this was also an advantage brought by twins. The brothers' independence was obviously much stronger than the little guy. If Aunt Zhang wanted to foster the little guy to someone else for a night, the little guy's eyes would probably be swollen from crying. Today's weather was good. The three little guys stayed in the children's playground for a while. The older brother proposed to have a snowball fight outside. The little guy had already built a snowman, but he had never had a snowball fight. So when he heard that he wanted to have a snowball fight, he jumped up excitedly on the spot. In the winter, snowballs didn't hurt on the body, but it would be dangerous if they were hit on the head. Looking at the three little guys running out of the door, Chen Shi quickly asked Qin Ruoying to watch them, and he quickly ran to buy helmets, gloves, and goggles for the three little guys. When the full set of equipment was ready, the three little guys started to have a snowball fight outside the tea house. A three-person melee was not fun. So under the organization of Chen Shi, they used snowballs to play sandbags. The older brother hid in the middle, while the little guy and the younger brother stood on both sides of him and hit him with snowballs. Whoever hit him would be the one to dodge. Playing sandbags was not as fun as dodging sandbags. In order to be able to dodge sandbags in the middle, the three little guys were completely inspired. So when the older brother accidentally fell, he quickly got up on his own before Chen Shi could help him. The little guy took advantage of the fall to hit him, but the older brother shouted that it didn't count, causing the younger brother to constantly make a face at him, saying that he was shameless. The three little guys were noisy, and their laughter resounded throughout the street. The couple leaned against the railing and leaned against the lakeside of Hohai Lake, quietly watching them play. The warm winter sun, the breeze of Hohai Lake. The greatest happiness in the world, in fact, was nothing more than this. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 176. Today's weather was really good, causing the tea house to have a few tables of guests for the first time. Even though the sun was out, the temperature should only be 3 or 4 degrees. The three little guys had been jumping around the whole morning. They were already tired and sweating profusely and gasping for breath. Strenuous exercise in the winter was easy to get sick, so Chen Shi took out 3 pills from Big Cat's snack tray and let each of them take one. Afterwards, Chen Shi also brought out 3 rattan chairs for them. When the three little guys were tired, they sat in a row outside the tea house, basking in the sun while discussing what to do next. The two brothers also had a restless personality. After resting for a while, they proposed to go outside for a stroll. The little guy was now the little follower behind the two brothers' buttocks. Wherever the two brothers wanted to go, the little guy wanted to go. Whatever the two brothers wanted to play, the little guy wanted to play. They really didn't have any opinions. There was no other way. Chen Shi couldn't persuade them, so after discussing with Qin Ruoying, he took the three little guys out. There was a big difference between summer and winter in Hohai. In summer, the lakeside willows were swaying. The lush greenery was overflowing. Boating on the lake was very leisurely and contented. In winter, the bare branches, white snow, as far as the eye could see, there was only a piece of desolation. Only in the middle of January, when Hohai froze, would this place become lively again. Now there was still some time before Hohai froze. The skating rink was not open, and Chen Shi didn't allow them to go near the lake. So after the three little guys circled around Hohai, they suddenly lost interest and kept clamoring to go back to play marbles. In the process of leading the three little guys back, Chen Shi went to the nearby store to buy 3 yo-yos for them. He simply showed them a few moves, which immediately made the two brothers widen their eyes. Yo-yos were imported from overseas, so some of the names of the moves would become very Chinibyu after being translated. For example, the names of moves such as Force Whirlwind, Atomic Flame, Lightning Strike, and so on were simply too embarrassing. However, the two brothers seemed to think that it was very cool. After hearing Chun-Shi introduce this move as Force Whirlwind, the two of them became even crazier. They kept throwing the yo-yos in their hands, and at the same time, they did not forget to shout, "Watch out! Force Whirlwind! Force Whirlwind! Bayu Bayu Bayu! Watch my lightning strike! Take this!" The two brothers started fighting with their yo-yos. When the two ropes collided with each other, they immediately formed a dead knot, and it took them a lot of effort to finally untie it. Perhaps it was the difference between boys and girls. The little guy wasn't interested in the strange names of the moves. Instead, he was interested in how Chun-Shi retrieved the yo-yo. "Papa, teach me." The little guy handed the yo-yo to Chun-Shi and looked up at him expectantly. Chun-Shi took the yo-yo and picked it up with one hand. Then he walked towards the tea house and gave her a demonstration. "Come on, look, release it, take it back. Be gentle. When the rope is tight, you lift it up. How is it? Have you learned it?" The little guy excitedly took the yo-yo from Chun-Shi's hands, and then did as he was told. He gently threw the yo-yo down, and when the rope tightened, he suddenly pulled it up, and the yo-yo was immediately wrapped in the rope and brought back. "I've learned it. I've learned it." The little guy excitedly put his arms around Chun-Shi's neck and giggled. Chun-Shi took the opportunity to kiss the little guy on the cheek, which made the little guy laugh even more. When Chun-Shi returned to the tea house with the three little guys, it was already past noon, so he ordered a few dishes in the restaurant next door, and prepared to let the children eat. Chun-Shi moved the rattan chair back to the tea house, and was ready to let the three little guys play inside. But the tea house welcomed another regular customer, Xiao Yuan. After not seeing her for a long time, Xiao Yuan finally dressed normally today. A down jacket and a pair of jeans, simple, seemed to be more suitable for her age. She was as pure as the spring moon, and as bright as a lotus flower. Xiao Yuan didn't come alone today. There was a middle-aged man about 50 years old standing next to her. The man was thin and tall, wearing a pair of glasses and a suit that didn't fit well. He always inadvertently gave people the feeling of an old pedant. He was obviously an intellectual. Chun-Shi was busy moving the rattan chair back to the tea house. After looking back at Xiao Yuan, he smiled and said hello to her. "Long time no see. Boss, let me help you." Xiao Yuan saw Chun-Shi's movements, so she quickly ran to his side and helped him move the last rattan chair. Chun-Shi didn't refuse. After Xiao Yuan helped him move the last rattan chair into the tea house, he walked out of the tea house with Xiao Yuan again, and then asked with a smile, "This is my father." Xiao Yuan replied a little embarrassedly, then stood to the side. At this time, Father Qiao went directly in front of Chun-Shi, and after bowing to him solemnly, he said excitedly, "Thank you, boss. Thank you for saving my life." Chun-Shi was a little embarrassed by his enthusiastic attitude, so he quickly smiled and said, "You don't have to be like this. You're too polite. It was just a small matter." No. It was just a small matter to you, but to me it was a life-saving grace. The ancients say that a drop of water should be repaid with a gushing spring, let alone a life-saving grace. After saying that, Father Qiao bowed to Chun-Shi again. Chun-Shi was really not used to dealing with old pedants like this. After helping Father Qiao up, he quickly said, "It's cold outside. Come in and sit." Seeing this, Xiao Yuan quickly mediated and said, "Dad, let's go in and talk." The father and daughter of the Qiao family came specially to thank Chun-Shi. Huaxia's medical field divided chronic kidney failure into 4 stages: renal compensation stage, renal decompensation stage, renal failure stage, pre-uremia, and uremia stage. The medical field of the United States divided chronic kidney failure into 5 stages. The so-called uremia stage was the 5th stage of chronic kidney failure, and it was also the final stage. The important indicator of kidney failure was the creatinine value. 133 was the first stage, 186 was the second stage, 451 was the third stage, and more than 707 meant that one had entered the fourth stage, which was the uremia stage. The higher the creatinine, the more toxins in the body, and the greater the damage to the kidney. When the creatinine value exceeded 500, one could begin to consider dialysis. The purpose of dialysis was to reduce the creatinine value. Human organ failure itself was an irreversible phenomenon. If it could be reversed, the person could live a long life. Therefore, there was no other treatment for uremia except for dialysis and kidney transplant. After every dialysis, the creatinine value in the patient's body would decrease. However, it would not be long before the creatinine value continued to rise because the patient's kidney function had been necrotic. If the organ was necrotic, it would take a miracle to recover. However, what everyone did not expect was, a miracle really happened. Chun-Shi casually gave a pill. After Father Chiao took it, his blood creatinine value began to decrease. Now it had dropped to 480, from the fourth stage to the third stage. This kind of reversal was almost impossible. This meant that Father Chiao's kidney function had begun to recover and perform the function of detoxification again, causing the creatinine value to continue to decrease. According to this progress, it would not be long before he recovered. Father Chiao's case shocked the entire Huaxia's medical field. After the hospital confirmed that Father Chiao's condition had indeed improved, Father Chiao refused to cooperate with the hospital's investigation and secretly went straight to Beijing with Qiao Yuan. Chapter 177. Father Chiao had only entered the stage of kidney failure before, and his blood creatinine value had not exceeded 707 UML/L. His illness was discovered early and dialysis control was done in time, so he had not truly entered the final stage, which was often referred to as the late stage of uremia. However, organ failure itself was an irreversible process. Even if it was discovered early, modern medicine could only control the patient's condition as much as possible and delay the deterioration of the condition. Father Chiao was indeed very lucky. Before his kidney function had completely failed, he had taken Chun-Shi's elixir in time, so he was able to effectively suppress the condition and let his organ function begin to recover. This time he had come to visit Chun-Shi with a grateful attitude, so he had brought a lot of Guangzhou specialties such as Guangnan bacon, black rice, fragrant rice, and other local specialties. Although they were not worth much, they were worth the thought. As the saying went, goose feathers were sent from 1,000 miles away. The gift was light, but the thought was heavy. Perhaps it was because Father Chiao had been diligent in teaching for a lifetime that he had saved enough good fortune for himself. Therefore, he had never thought that this kind of grateful attitude would actually save his life by accident. A simplified version of the energy elixir would not be able to fully restore his kidney. After the effect of the elixir wore off, his condition would naturally begin to deteriorate again. As the saying went, when you saved someone, you should help them to the end. Chun-Shi was not a stingy person. After hearing Father Chiao's intentions, he took out 2 more energy elixirs from the bar counter. It was still the same explanation. The pills left by the old Chinese medicine doctor were very helpful for kidney disease. But this time, when Qiao Yuan took the pills from Chun-Shi's hand, she was so excited that her whole body trembled slightly. After Chun-Shi told them that they could take it all at once, Qiao Yuan hurriedly helped her father swallow the 2 pills one by one. After taking the pills, the father and daughter were so excited that they could not control themselves. A teacher in a small county had not seen much of the world in his life. He did not even know how to say a few words of courtesy. He only knew how to repeatedly thank Chun-Shi. Looking at his excited expression, it was as if he was about to dig out his heart and show it to Chun-Shi. Qiao Yuan wasn't any better. When she heard that Chun-Shi had convinced her father to take these 2 pills, she was so excited that tears almost flowed out. It was actually quite painful to deal with people who didn't know how to socialize. One of the most likely situations to occur was awkwardness. Everyone felt awkward because they couldn't get along. Therefore, Chun-Shi thought for a while and changed the topic to Qiao Yuan. At the mention of his daughter, Father Chiao finally opened his mouth. In that little corner of our little place, I, old Chiao, can be considered to have some fame. When Xiao Qiao came home and told me all those things, I almost fainted from anger. If it wasn't for her mother stopping me, I would have beaten her to death. I came to Shangjing this time to thank you in person. Thank you for saving my life. Secondly, I want Jojo to return all the money I swindled. Although we are poor, we don't earn this kind of black-hearted money. After all, Xiao Yuan was only a university student in her early 20s and hadn't experienced society. To put it bluntly, she was still insensible and hadn't grown up. She only wanted to earn money to treat her father's illness, but she didn't think about how to earn money. She did whatever came quickly. If everyone was like her, then society would be a mess. The Qiao family didn't have much money, but Xiao Yuan grew up in a scholarly family and received a good education. However, because of a small setback in front of her, she went astray and did the shady business of swindling people. This kind of behavior was simply unforgivable in Father Qiao's eyes. Although in a big city like Shangjing, Xiao Yuan's family could only be considered as ordinary people living at the bottom of society. However, it was this kind of country teacher who had never seen the world and couldn't even speak standard Mandarin that always had the awareness of being a role model. Therefore, he couldn't accept his daughter's behavior at all. Father Qiao punished Xiao Yuan by kneeling for an entire night, and then asked Xiao Yuan to return all the money to others. Together with the keyboard player and the boss's share, she had to return the amount that they were swindled of. The last deal was with Wang Hao's brother. The money had already been returned, but before that, Xiao Yuan had already earned 12,000 yuan. In other words, she had to pay back an additional 18,000 yuan when she returned it. Back then, she only earned 12,000 yuan, but now she had to return 30,000 yuan. Of course, Xiao Yuan didn't have that much money, so the remaining 18,000 yuan was naturally paid by Father Qiao. When it came to matters of principle, Father Qiao was very old-fashioned and wouldn't change what he had decided on. Xiao Yuan couldn't persuade him, so she could only call people in front of Father Qiao. After returning the money, Xiao Yuan also received countless curses and scoldings. She felt so wronged that she cried a few times. However, from Father Qiao's point of view, she only had herself to blame and didn't deserve sympathy. After hearing how Father Qiao educated his daughter, Chunxi couldn't help but look back at the three little guys in the corner. As a father, Father Qiao was clearly qualified. When the children went down the wrong path, as a parent, he naturally had to pull them back. A teacher in a small county who had taught for a lifetime might seem mediocre to others, but at least when it came to educating children, Father Qiao was absolutely successful. The two didn't chat for long before the restaurant next door delivered the food that Chunxi had just ordered. Chunxi warmly invited the father and daughter of the Qiao family to stay for a meal, but Father Qiao was unwilling. After repeatedly thanking Chunxi for saving his life, he hurriedly left with his daughter. He came by train and didn't know how long it would take to arrive, so he didn't buy a return ticket. He should still be able to make it if he rushed to buy a ticket now. From Guangzhou to Shangjing, it would only take 5 or 6 hours. This way he could still save on today's accommodation fee. The father and daughter of the Qiao family came in a hurry and left in a hurry. However, Father Qiao's appearance brought a lot of inspiration to Chunxi. From this, it could be seen that educating children was a long and arduous task. As a parent, it wasn't enough to just raise a child. The tea house continued to operate. The winter sun was very short. Before 4 o'clock, it was gloomy outside again. The three little guys were tired from playing today, so they seemed a little listless all afternoon. Drowsiness was contagious. After the little guy fell asleep on the climbing mat, the two brothers also lay down next to her and fell asleep. It wasn't until they were about to close that Qin Ruoying woke them up. The two brothers first rubbed their eyes. When they heard Qin Ruoying say that she was going to take them home, they nodded in a daze. Grandpa said that they had to listen to their uncle and aunt today. But it wasn't until Chunxi picked up the little guy and Qin Ruoying led them out of the tea house that the two brothers finally came back to their senses. Chapter 178. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the family of three brought their two followers back to the Sihiyuan. Most of the local residents in Hohai lived in the Sihiyuan. Therefore, the two brothers didn't feel that there was anything special about their two-section Sihiyuan. This place only had an extra front yard and a few more rooms compared to a normal Sihiyuan. But because this was their sister's home, the two brothers were curious about every room. Once they entered the courtyard, the little boy led them everywhere. The back room, the west room, the east room, the main hall, and the back room. They ran through every single room. They even alerted Qin Yongyan in the study. When the little boy saw his grandfather, who had not shown up for a long time, he immediately stood under the eaves and sweetly shouted, "Grandfather!" When the two brothers heard this, they very obediently followed the little boy and shouted, "Hello, grandfather." Qin Yongyan lowered his head and looked at the three little ones in front of him. Then he couldn't help but laugh. Using his hand to pat their heads, Qin Yongyan smiled and said, "Good boys, you guys go play." Okay. The little boy nodded and led the two brothers into the main hall. She was still a little unfamiliar with her grandfather. If it was Aunt Zhang, the little boy would have already run over to her and asked for a hug. Looking at the three little guys running away in front of him, the smile on Qin Yongyan's face didn't disappear for a moment. He looked to be in his 40s, but in reality, Qin Yongyan's real age was even older than Aunt Zhang. At 30, no doubts at 40, knowing destiny at 50, ear docile at 60, and senile at 70. The so-called ear docile didn't mean that one's ears were sharp, but it meant that one could listen to unpleasant words. It didn't matter if one was cursed or scolded. Nothing could go against one's heart. At this age, one had basically seen through life and seen through fame and fortune. Perhaps it was because of his state of mind, Qin Yongyan's recent cultivation progress could be said to be very fast. He was almost at the late stage of qi refinement. As his cultivation progressed, Qin Yongyan became more aware of Chen Qi's power. His son-in-law was so powerful that his father-in-law couldn't even raise his head in front of him. But it was also because of this that his daughter was living a happy life now. Qin Ruoying didn't even dare to imagine such a life. Even he felt like he was living in a dream. Thinking of this, Qin Yongyan could not help but shake his head and return to the study. After the three little fellows walked around the entire courtyard, they finally returned to the front of the main hall, because they wanted to have a good game of hide and seek. Rock, scissors, paper. Rock, scissors, paper. After 3 draws, the little fellow and her brother used scissors, while her brother used paper. After realizing that he had lost, the elder brother stomped his feet in anger. However, he was willing to accept his loss. Although he was a little unwilling, he still obediently leaned on the table and counted loudly. The little fellow and her brother turned around and ran out of the main hall. The younger brother was still a little unfamiliar with the road, so he followed the little fellow with his head down and ran towards the west wing. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but become anxious. She did not dare to speak, so she could only push her brother to the opposite east wing. After her brother turned around and ran to the east wing in a panic, the little fellow slipped into the wardrobe in the west wing. This was her favorite place to hide, because there were a lot of clothes in the wardrobe, so it was very warm to squeeze in there. The elder brother's countdown soon ended. When he walked out of the main hall, the entire courtyard quieted down. Chen Qi was busy cooking for them in the kitchen, while Qin Ruoying stood on the steps outside the west wing and looked at him with a smile. The elder brother was very clever. After looking around, he trotted to Qin Ruoying, raised his head and whispered, "Auntie, do they know where they are hiding?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying shook her head with a smile and did not tell him. The elder brother had no choice but to look for them honestly. He first went into the west wing and looked around, but did not find anything strange. It was probably because this was not his home, so the elder brother did not think of looking through the wardrobe. After looking around and not seeing anyone, the elder brother ran directly to the east wing opposite. At this time, the little fellow, who had been paying attention to the situation outside, quietly pushed open the wardrobe a little. After confirming that the elder brother had left, the little fellow came out of the wardrobe, and then leaned against the window to secretly observe the elder brother's every move. Not long after the elder brother ran into the east wing, there was a burst of cheers from inside. Then, the elder brother walked out with the younger brother, who was frowning. Perhaps wanting to end this game quickly, after the elder brother looked around the main hall, The younger brother pointed to the west wing quietly. Seeing this, the elder brother immediately rushed into the west wing with a laugh. The little fellow was leaning against the window, laughing secretly. When she saw the elder brother rushing to the west wing, she was suddenly shocked. She wanted to crawl back into the wardrobe, but it was too late, so she was caught red-handed by the elder brother who rushed over. "Found you! I found you!" The elder brother's proud laughter sounded in the courtyard. Hide-and-seek was indeed a very fun game. As long as the venue was suitable, it could be played for a long time. The three little guys played several games in a row until Chun-Shi finished cooking dinner. They reluctantly returned to the west wing under the husband and wife's greeting. After dinner, the sky was already dark. Qin Ruoying did not allow them to go out and run around. So the three little guys sat on the bed and watched cartoons. The elder brother wanted to watch Pigman, the younger brother wanted to watch Boonie Bears, and the little fellow wanted to watch SpongeBob SquarePants. The three little guys had different opinions, and immediately quarreled over the control of the remote control. Seeing this, Chun-Shi had to suppress them. He took the remote control and let them order Frozen. The little fellow had already seen it once, but she still enjoyed watching it the second time. It was the brothers' first time watching it, so they were immediately fascinated by the beautiful magic world inside. There was a kissing scene in Frozen. When the elder brother saw Anna and Christopher hugging and kissing, the elder brother followed suit and turned his head to kiss the little fellow. But just as his mouth was about to kiss the little fellow, the elder brother regrettably found that there seemed to be an air wall between him and Yin Yin. No matter how hard he tried, there was no way he could get closer. The elder brother's movements were very fast. After being stopped by Chun-Shi, Qin Ruoying noticed that something was wrong. When she saw the elder brother's embarrassed look as he tried to kiss the little fellow, she could not help but secretly laugh. At this time, the little fellow also noticed that something was wrong with her brother. Just as she turned her head, she was shocked by her brother's pig-like appearance, so she patted his forehead with her hand and muttered, "What are you doing?" The elder brother awkwardly retracted his head, and then hid under the blanket, not daring to show his head. The husband and wife looked at each other, and could not help but shake their heads and laugh. 4 or 5-year-old children did not have so many dirty thoughts. Their behavior was learned from the things around them, so Chun-Shi did not blame him. However, it was because of the elder brother's sudden action that they completely lost the opportunity to sleep with the little fellow. After watching the cartoon, the two brothers were carried by Chun-Shi, one in each hand, and directly led them to the east wing. Tonight, the little fellow slept with Qin Ruoying, and the two brothers slept with him. The two brothers cried and made a fuss, shouting that they wanted to sleep with their sister. But Chun-Shi did not pay attention to them at all. As if he did not hear them. They wanted to take advantage of his daughter. Chapter 179. The two brothers hesitated for a long time. Although they were usually very outgoing, they seemed to be homesick at night. The one they were most familiar with in the courtyard was the little guy, so the two brothers always wanted to sleep with the little guy. But no matter how much they cried, Chun-Shi was unmoved. He was quite traditional in this aspect. Because Yin Yin was a girl, Chun-Shi always felt that his daughter would be at a disadvantage if she stayed with a boy. Plus, his brother almost took advantage of the little guy just now, which made Chun-Shi even more certain that girls were at a disadvantage. He was already very polite that he didn't chase the two brothers out of the courtyard. Although the two brothers were still young, 3 to 6 years old was the sensitive period for a child to construct a psychological gender. As a parent, it was natural to teach the child that there was a difference between men and women. Parents gave the child the correct guidance, and as the child grew up, they would gradually form a comprehensive understanding of men and women's clothing, behavior, and personality traits, and gradually form their own psychological gender. As for those parents who raised the boy as a girl and the girl as a boy, in fact, he really should go see Farewell My Concubine, because Chung Die was an excellent example. This was called transsexualism in the medical field, which was also called gender identity disorder. There were both congenital and acquired factors. If it was congenital, then it was fine, but if it was acquired by the parents, then it could be called a tragedy. Chinshi had already made up his mind. One day, he would have to properly educate the three little guys and let them understand the difference between men and women. The east room was Qin Xueqing's room. Although she hadn't been home for many days, there was still a faint fragrance in the room. The bed was very comfortable to sleep on, but the two brothers tossed and turned for a long time. Chinshi was not Gu Lao after all, nor was he the brother's father. So after a while, seeing that Chinshi still refused to agree, they could only obediently lie on the bed with pouted lips. The two brothers were also tired today, so it didn't take long for them to fall into a deep sleep. After they fell asleep, Chinshi cast 2 meditation incantations on the two brothers, and then quietly walked out of the east room. It was the wee hours of the morning, and there was no moon tonight. It was so dark in the courtyard that one couldn't even see their own fingers. The temperature in the middle of the night was very low. The bone-piercing cold wind kept blowing, bringing with it some light snow that drifted into the courtyard. There was a slight fluctuation of spiritual aura in the west wing and the main room. That was because Qin Ruoying and Qin Yongyan were both cultivating diligently. Chapter 180. Perhaps because of the home field advantage, the two brothers completely became the little guy's followers. When they woke up, Chinshi had just finished helping them wash up, and the two brothers rushed into the west wing. The little guy was already sitting on the chair and eating breakfast. When he saw them rushing in, he held up a steamed bun and smiled at them. Time for breakfast. Children don't know what is polite, so they rushed over as soon as they entered the door. The older brother saw that there was only one chair in front of him, so he pushed his younger brother away and quickly sat on the chair himself. The younger brother was not happy, so he pushed him a few times and squeezed in to sit with him. You go over there. I don't want to. I want to sit here. Get out of the way. You're squeezing me. Why? This is not your chair. Qin Ruoying looked at the two brothers, and then got up to give the seat to the younger brother, which stopped their first quarrel of the day. This was the bad thing about twins. They always wanted to win or lose. Qin Ruoying was serving the three little guys, but Chinshi suddenly received a call from Gu Lao. The old man was delayed by something, so he would not be back until the afternoon. Although he believed that Chinshi would not treat the two brothers badly, out of concern for his grandson, Gu Lao talked with Chinshi for a while, and then euphemistically expressed that he wanted to talk to the two brothers. Hearing this, Chinshi turned on the speaker and put the phone in front of the two brothers. The two brothers, one after another, related in a little while what they had done on the previous day. After listening, Gu Lao finally felt relieved and hung up the phone. Chinshi told the two brothers that their grandfather would come back in the afternoon to pick them up. However, what he did not expect was that the two brothers were not sad at all after hearing the news, but jumped with joy. Uncle, can you take us out to play? Huh? Where do you want to go? The amusement park. Hearing this, Chinshi and Qin Ruoying couldn't help but look at each other. It was probably because they heard Nian bragging about her experience at the children's playground that the two brothers engraved that place in their minds. Just like Nian in the past, she was very envious of others, but Auntie Zhang couldn't bring her along. Thinking about it, it was quite pitiful. Thus, Chinshi patted the brothers' heads and said with a smile, Okay, Uncle will take you there. We'll leave after breakfast, okay? All right. The two brothers were so excited that their faces turned red, while the little fellow was smiling proudly at the side, as if silently saying that they were basking in her light. What was the reaction of the child when he was excited? He stomped his feet. After hastily eating breakfast, her brother ran to the steps outside the west wing. He kept jumping and shouting, Hurry up, hurry up. But at this time, the older brother quickly stood up from the ground and said to the younger brother, You carry me up, and I'll pull you up after I'm up. The younger brother didn't doubt him, so he stood below and supported the older brothers but with all his strength, sending him up. The little fellow sat on the big bear's leg, and pulled the older brother's arm up with all her strength. With their joint efforts, the older brother successfully climbed up. However, after the older brother went up, he didn't pull the younger brother. After making a face at the younger brother, he laughed proudly and said, "Come up by yourself." With that, the older brother jumped onto the other leg of the big bear. The younger brother stood below and looked at the little fellow, and the older brother on the big bear's leg with a confused expression. He tried to climb up by himself, but the big bear's leg was higher than him, so it was impossible for him to climb up. "I'll pull you up." The little fellow couldn't stand the older brother's behavior, so she immediately lay on the big bear's leg and reached out to the younger brother. However, her strength was limited, so she couldn't pull the younger brother up by herself. The younger brother slipped down again. Looking at the older brother's proud look, the more the younger brother thought about it, the more wronged he felt. He couldn't help but cry out of anger. Seeing this, Chunshi wanted to go forward and help his younger brother, but he was stopped by Qin Ruoying. "Wait, let's see." Sure enough, seeing the younger brother cry, the smile on the older brother's face froze. He thought for a moment and immediately jumped back, then lay on the big bear's leg and said to the younger brother, "Don't cry. I'll pull you up." With that, the older brother stretched out his hands to the younger brother. The little fellow also stretched out her hands again. The younger brother wiped his tears, glanced at the older brother, and then stretched out his hands very aggrievedly. Finally, with the joint efforts of the little fellow and the older brother, the younger brother successfully climbed onto the big bear's leg. Although the older brother finally pulled him up, the younger brother seemed to be still angry with the older brother, so after coming up he directly jumped onto the other leg of the big bear to sulk. At this time, Qin Ruoying took out her mobile phone with a smile, then came to the big bear and took a group photo of the three little guys. In the photo, Chapter 181. In KIDs with Eleni, the ticket price for Friends was so high, but seriously, it was not worth the price. Especially for people like Chunshi who could only take a few photos all year round. This place was not as entertaining as the Children's Experience Center that he took the little guy to last time. There were only a few main amusement facilities here. Brown Bear's rock climbing wall, Coney Rabbit's spider tower, Edward's slide, Leo the Frog's trampoline, Steamed Bun Man's sky net, as well as a pink ocean pool and some scattered small toys. The biggest selling point was not the children's entertainment facilities at all, but the decoration design style. The background was white, giving people a clean and bright feeling, and there were giant dolls everywhere. Once people walked in, they would feel like they were in a fantasy world. Therefore, it became a selfie mecca for online celebrities to show off their love. The designer probably targeted the parents, not the children themselves. That was why it was so popular. Of course, this did not mean that this place was useless. After all, these entertainment facilities were still very attractive to children. The children's paradise was divided into two levels. The upper level was a hollow climbing net with a rotating slide in the middle. Perhaps because there were so many people, the voices of the three little guys were particularly loud, attracting a lot of attention as soon as they came in. The weekend ticket was 200 yuan more expensive than the weekday ticket, so there were fewer people. The three little guys walked into the children's paradise. As soon as they saw the climbing net leading to the second floor, the older brother immediately shouted, "I want the slide!" His words were like a spark thrown into a barrel of explosives, instantly igniting the little guy and the younger brother. The three little fellows rushed towards the climbing net almost as if they were trying to outdo each other. They had to compete to see who could climb faster, and who fell behind was a puppy. The parents could only wait below. So the couple sat by the ocean pool and quietly watched the three little guys play. There were many people who came here to take photos, and there was even an internet celebrity lying in the ocean pool and doing a live broadcast. Perhaps affected by the surrounding atmosphere, Chunshi asked Qin Ruoying to take out her mobile phone. The two of them also planned to join in the fun and take a selfie. Just as the two of them leaned together to take selfies with their mobile phones, a little girl holding a DSLR carefully approached them. "Hello, I'm a student from Peking University's photography department. Can I take a picture for you?" The little girl's name was Sun Yuan. Her name was round, but she was actually a skinny little girl who was less than 1.6 meters tall. In terms of age, she was about the same age as Qiao Yuan, so she seemed a little shy. Just like a dam that had just been opened, the water level downstream would not rise in a short time. But if this continued, then the spirit energy of heaven and earth would continue to increase. If this continued, Earth would inevitably become the second heavenly jade domain. Earth's spirit energy, recovered? As soon as this thought appeared in Chen-Shi's mind, his heart couldn't help but jump, and his whole body couldn't help but tremble. This matter involved too much, and even Chen-Shi was a little shocked. In order to verify his guess, Chen-Shi pondered for a while, then rushed to the sky and went straight to the Qinling Mountains. Because he was familiar with that place. After the spirit binding array was activated, it set off a tide of spirit energy. Now that the array had been destroyed, the accumulation of the village for hundreds of years was also destroyed. Logically speaking, the spirit energy of that place would inevitably drop by a level. So he only needed to go there and take a look to know what was going on. The moonlight in the Qinling Mountains was very bright. The moonlight was like a silver radiance, shining on the piles of snow and reflecting the cold light, illuminating everything around. The village had been reduced to ruins, and the villagers had all left. In the center of the ruins, there was a huge semicircular crater left behind after the battle between Chen-Shi and the Immortal General. Immortal cultivators were not nuclear bombs, and after collision, there would be no radiation. Instead, a lot of true essence would escape. True essence was the product of refining the spirit energy of heaven and earth, so the deepest part of the crater was the place with the densest spirit energy. In the huge crater, a tulip was leisurely blooming in it. Tulips were very resistant to cold, and could withstand a low temperature of -35°C in winter. When the temperature returned to above 8°C, it could begin to grow. But under the stimulation of the surging spirit energy, this tulip actually bloomed in this cold winter. The spirit energy of heaven and earth here had actually recovered to the level before the array was destroyed. Chen-Shi frowned as he floated above the ruins, staring at the deep crater in front of him in a daze. Suddenly, a thought jumped out of his mind. Immortal General of Tianmen? Tide of spirit energy. Chapter 188. Ice carts were a common entertainment in winter in the north, but they were rare in the south. Many southerners probably hadn't even seen what ice carts looked like. The so-called ice carts were actually invented to allow people who didn't know how to skate to experience the fun of ice skating. The three little guys played for a while. When they saw people constantly passing by them on ice skates, their interest was aroused. Thus, they were no longer satisfied with the ice carts and clamored for Chen-Shi to teach them how to skate. Learning to skate was actually similar to learning to swim. Some people could learn it in an hour or two, while others couldn't learn it in a week or two. Seeing that the three little guys were so enthusiastic, Chen-Shi couldn't persuade them, so he rented 3 pairs of ice skates for them and took them to the skating area. Ice skates were a very magical thing in the eyes of the little guy. After Chen-Shi helped her put on the skates, she couldn't help but touch the ice skates under the skates. Then she kicked her little feet and scraped a layer of ice on the ground with the ice skates. Looking at her smug look, she was probably very happy in her heart. After Chen-Shi drove the ice carts to the skating area with the 3 little guys, The little guy eagerly wanted to get off the ice carts. Newborn calves were not afraid of tigers. The little guy didn't care so much and wanted to stand up directly when she stepped on the ice. Children who were just over 4 years old could suddenly fall down while walking on the road, let alone on ice. Sure enough, just as the little guy stood up from the ice carts, her right foot suddenly slipped and her small body suddenly fell backward. At such a critical moment, naturally he had to act as a father. Chun-Shi was also prepared. As soon as the little girl fell down, he had already reached his hand behind the little girl's back and helped her stand up again. This scared the little guy. After holding Chun-Shi's arm and standing firm, she didn't dare to let go. Trying to scrape her feet on the ground twice, the little guy shouted at Chun-Shi with a frightened face, "Papa, I can't stand up." Before Chun-Shi could reply, the brother sitting on the ice carts immediately responded, "Grandpa said that ice is very slippery. That's why we can't stand on the ice. You have to hold on to something." The two brothers grew up in Hohai, so they had come here to play a long time ago. However, at this time last year, they were only 3 years old. It was obviously impossible for Gu Lao to teach them to skate. The two brothers had been longing for ice skating for a long time. Looking at her brother's serious face, Chun-Shi couldn't help but laugh. "Come Nian, come here. Daddy will support you." After holding the little fellow's hand and standing on the ice, Chun-Shi slowly dragged her to his side. Then he turned to the brothers and said, "You two stay in the car.